The second princess of the Realm Empire, Talia, sits quietly as an elderly maid brushes her hair and praises her angelic beauty. Warm sunlight pours through the grand windows of her spacious dressing room, illuminating the countless perfumes and ornaments surrounding her vanity. Everything looks peaceful until the maid mentions that Talia is the spitting image of the late Lady Senevier. The atmosphere immediately changes. The comparison to her mother at 18 earns the old woman nothing but an icy glare. Realizing her mistake, the maid quickly falls silent. Trying to recover, she presents a magnificent red and gold gown that had been prepared especially for the princess. According to her, it was the exact dress Lady Senevier wore when she first entered the imperial palace. Talia questions how she could possibly remember such details after so many years, but the maid insists that day was unforgettable. Lady Senevier had been so beautiful that people were moved to tears, and even the emperor himself had been completely captivated by her grace. Talia has no interest in hearing more. She cuts the story short and orders the maid to finish her preparations. Soon, the princess stands before the mirror in the regal gown. She looks every bit like royalty, yet that still isn't enough. She wants to surpass her mother. She wants every eye in the banquet hall fixed on her alone. But another thought soon follows. Is this really the appearance an imperial princess should have? In an instant, she grabs a heavy golden candlestick and smashes the mirror to pieces. The maid recoils in horror while Talia stands calmly among the shattered glass. To her mother's relationship with the emperor was nothing but a disgraceful affair. Even after Lady Senevier became empress, that stain could never be erased. The past would continue haunting her for as long as she lived. An official eventually arrives to escort her to the banquet, complimenting her appearance, only to be immediately silenced. Talia orders him to stop wasting time and prepare the carriage. As the sun sets, she rides alone toward the palace. Her expression remains unreadable, but her thoughts are anything but calm. Tonight's banquet will be filled with laughter, celebration, and happy conversations. Deep down, she wishes for the complete opposite. She hopes everything falls apart in chaos and bloodshed. By the time they arrive, the last light of evening paints the sky in gold, and Talia can only hope that something disastrous happens before the night is over. The moment the second princess of the Realm Empire is announced, whispers spread throughout the banquet hall. Talia walks in with her head held high, paying no attention to the countless eyes watching her. One nobleman eventually gathers enough courage to approach and question why she's here. Talia simply stares at him with a cold, unreadable expression. In her eyes, he's just another one of Ayla's followers. A chilling smile forms on her face as she steps closer and asks whether she's somewhere she shouldn't be. This is her father's palace, and tonight's celebration is meant for her siblings. Why shouldn't she be here? The young noble quickly loses his confidence, and Talia leaves him behind without another glance. Her attention soon shifts toward the royal seats. Gareth and Ayla still haven't arrived. The memory of Ayla coughing up blood after being poisoned flashes through her mind. Perhaps the humiliation kept her away. Perhaps she wouldn't even show her face tonight. Talia tightens her grip on her wineglass as darker thoughts begin to surface. Before they can consume her completely, someone familiar approaches. Count Sarian greets her warmly after such a long time apart. Elegant and composed, he kisses her hand with practiced noble etiquette. When Talia asks whether her mother sent him, he admits that the Empress is always concerned about her, though he insists he would have come regardless. He points out something Talia has chosen to ignore. Every man in the hall is watching her. Many wish to approach, but none are willing to risk offending the crown prince. Sarian, however, has long been on the prince's bad side already, so escorting her tonight feels more like a blessing than a punishment. Talia asks whether her mother sent him to rescue her troublesome eldest daughter, but Sarian simply replies that his duty is to ensure she enjoys the banquet. With a charming smile, he bows and extends his hand, inviting the princess to dance. Talia studies his hand carefully before finally accepting it. The two step onto the dance floor as the surrounding nobles watch in silence. Her guard never drops and suspicion remains in her eyes, yet she quickly realizes that Sarian is an excellent dancer. Their movements flow effortlessly across the checkered floor, and for perhaps the first time that evening, a faint smile appears on Talia's face. The moment is short-lived. The arrival of the royal siblings is announced, bringing their dance to an end. Sarian remarks that it's unfortunate the fun had to end so soon. All attention shifts toward the grand staircase as Gareth and Ayla make their entrance. They appear every bit like the Empire's perfect royal pair. Congratulations fill the hall as nobles gather around them, offering their blessings. Ayla accepts their kind words with elegance, while Talia remains at the edge of the celebration. The contrast between them couldn't be clearer. Unable to endure the sight any longer, she looks away. The endless comparisons to her siblings only fuel the bitterness within her. Count Sarian notices that Gareth and Ayla haven't acknowledged her presence at all and asks whether she intends to greet them. Talia remains silent, tightening her grip on her wineglass as she prepares to move forward. Then, suddenly, she stops. A familiar figure has entered the hall. A tall man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes walks toward the royal family with the authority of a seasoned soldier. It is Barkas Leidosir Khan, captain of the Rayam Imperial Guard. His presence alone commands the attention of the entire court. Yet while everyone else admires him, Talia can only stare. Her emotions begin to churn beneath the surface. Barkas approaches Gareth and Ayla, completely unaware that Talia has fixed her gaze upon him. When he extends his hand toward Ayla, the wineglass in Talia's hand nearly cracks under the pressure. Ayla smiles brightly and reaches out to accept him, while the nobles watch the couple with admiration. Talia, however, can barely contain her rage. The very thought of Ayla touching Barkas fills her with fury. Sarian quietly suggests leaving the ballroom, but Talia ignores him. Instead, she steps forward. The crowd parts as the second princess makes her way toward the center of the hall. Gareth, Ayla, and Barkas all turn toward her, their expressions filled with confusion. Talia stops before them with regal composure and offers a greeting wrapped in politeness and sarcasm. She addresses Gareth as her respected elder brother before congratulating Ayla on recovering her health. After all, the last time they met, her dear sister had been coughing up blood. Ayla simply thanks her for the concern. Yet Talia cannot understand how Ayla can stand there so peacefully, completely unaware that she was the one responsible. In her heart, she regrets showing mercy. The poison should have been fatal. The thought of Ayla's death still lingers within her, regardless of the consequences. At that moment, Gareth finally loses his patience. He demands to know how Talia dares to show herself in such a disgraceful manner, accusing her of trying to seduce the men loyal to the crown. Talia remains calm. She merely gestures toward her dress and reveals that it is the same gown their mother wore when she first met the emperor. A heavy silence follows. The meaning behind those words leaves Gareth visibly shaken. Before the situation escalates further, Ayla places a hand on her brother's shoulder and changes the subject. She thanks Talia for attending such an important occasion and announces that her wedding date with Barkas has finally been decided. Soon, she will leave for the east and join the Seerkhan family. In many ways, this banquet serves as their final farewell. Our girl smiles gently and offers her blessings for Ayla's future. Then everything changes. Red wine suddenly stains the princess's gown. The entire hall falls silent, and Talia can only smile as she wishes for her sister's complete ruin. Talia's wish for bloodshed had barely left her lips before Gareth exploded in anger. He looked ready to attack, but someone else moved first. A rough hand suddenly grabbed Talia's wrist. She let out a pained gasp as the crushing grip stopped her in place. Standing before her was Barkas, his cold blue eyes fixed on her without the slightest hint of sympathy. According to him, Talia had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. His grip only tightened. No matter how hard she struggled, he refused to let go. Meanwhile, Gareth rushed to Ayla's side, making sure she was unharmed. Barkas looks back at Talia and asks how much lower she intends to fall. Was humiliating herself not enough? Had she really reached the point where even this wasn't the bottom? The hall falls silent as the two stare each other down. Neither of them is willing to back away. But Talia doesn't flinch. Instead, she mocks him for acting so righteous. From his point of view, she probably does look like someone who's reached rock bottom. But he's wrong. She's nowhere near the bottom yet. As Barkas forcefully lifts her arm, Talia realizes something. If her life truly ends in ruin, there's a good chance he'll be the one responsible. Fine. If she's destined to fall, then she'll make sure to leave scars on his future before she does. Before the confrontation can go any further, Ayla quietly asks Barkas to escort her away so she can change her stained dress. Barkas hesitates for a brief moment before releasing Talia's wrist. Without another word, he turns his attention to Ayla, gently placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder as he leads her away. Talia watches them disappear into the crowd. Her hand slowly tightens into a fist. The anger hasn't faded. If anything, it's only grown stronger. A few moments later, Count Sarian approaches and advises her to leave immediately before the situation gets any worse. Talia refuses. After all, Ayla herself invited her to enjoy the banquet. And according to Talia, she hasn't enjoyed it yet. Sarian sighs before reminding her of one important detail. Prince Gareth hasn't taken his eyes off her, and judging by that expression, he's barely holding himself back. Eventually, Talia leaves the banquet and heads for her carriage. It seems the night is finally over, or so she thinks. The moment she steps inside, a powerful shove sends her crashing to the ground. Before she can even understand what happened, Gareth is already standing over her. Then his hand wraps around her throat. Without warning, he begins choking her. Talia desperately claws at his hand, kicking and struggling for air as his grip grows tighter. Her nails dig into his skin, drawing blood. Gareth barely reacts. He coldly tells her to stop scratching him. The royal family already despises her enough as it is. A moment later, he finally lets go. Talia collapses onto the floor of the carriage, coughing violently as she struggles to breathe again. Outside, the attendants stand frozen. No one dares interfere. Gareth looks back one last time before leaving. He warns her to remember this moment well. Her mother's reckless actions and the existence of an illegitimate daughter disturbing the imperial palace will only be tolerated for so long. With that, the prince walks away. Only after he's gone do Count Sarian and the attendants rush to the carriage, asking if she's all right. But instead of crying, Talia laughs. A quiet, unsettling laugh echoes through the dark carriage. She slowly raises her hand and studies her fingernails. They're stained with Gareth's blood. A faint smile spreads across her face as she murmurs that she'll have to sharpen them again. This time, until they can pierce straight through to the bone. Then she closes her eyes. The sight of that blood pulls her back to another painful memory from years ago. A memory she has never been able to leave behind. Talia's memories carry her back to her childhood. She remembers the day her mother, now the Empress, happily told her that her name would finally be entered into the imperial genealogy. From that moment on, the imperial palace would be her home. Smiling warmly, the Empress asks her little daughter if she's happy, but Talia never answers. Her attention is fixed on the dark palace corridors, where the servants greet her with nothing but cold, hostile stares. Even as a child, she could feel that she wasn't welcome. Unable to bear those suffocating gazes any longer, she runs out of the palace just as dark clouds begin gathering overhead. Before long, rain starts pouring across the palace grounds. A faint chirping suddenly catches her attention, and she discovers a tiny blue bird lying helpless in the mud. Without thinking, she rushes toward it, but the slippery ground causes her to lose her footing. She falls straight into the mud, soaking her beautiful green dress. Frustrated, she looks at the mess she's become and wonders why she should even care about a little bird. Then the weak chirping sounds again. The tiny creature is still alive. Forgetting about herself, Talia gently lifts it from the mud and sighs in relief when she feels it move in her hands. She carefully holds the fragile bird against her chest, hoping her warmth will keep it alive. As she looks at the abandoned little bird, she can't help but see herself. Just like her, it has been left alone with no one to protect it. She presses it gently against her cheek while looking around the empty palace grounds, unsure of what to do next. The rain continues to pour without mercy, leaving the young girl standing alone in the middle of the muddy field. Surrounded by nothing but silence, she feels more isolated than ever. Then she notices someone. Standing beneath a large tree is a mysterious boy wearing a hooded cloak. Even through the heavy rain, his silver gray hair and striking pale blue eyes stand out. He silently watches Talia before slowly making his way toward her. His footsteps splash through the mud as he approaches, completely unfazed by the storm. Talia instinctively grows defensive, startled by his sudden appearance, but the boy simply studies her with quiet curiosity, as if wondering why a little girl is all alone in such a place. When he finally stops in front of her, he stretches out his hand and tells her to take it. Talia remains frozen, staring at the stranger while the rain continues to fall around them. He patiently keeps his hand extended, waiting for her response. His eyes eventually shift toward the tiny bird she's holding, and he tells her to throw it away. In its current condition, it isn't worth carrying. Talia immediately refuses. No matter how insignificant it may seem, she has no intention of abandoning it. The boy looks at her in silence, clearly surprised by her determination. Then, without another word, he suddenly lifts her into his arms. Talia lets out a startled gasp, completely caught off guard. Still holding the little bird tightly against her chest, she looks up at the mysterious boy with a blushing face. He simply adjusts his grip on her and quietly mutters that she's made quite a mess of herself as he carries her away through the rain. Talia remains in the mysterious boy's arms as he carries her through the pouring rain, shielding her from the cold wind with his large cloak. Looking down at the soaked little princess, he can't help but think she's become a complete mess. Talia, meanwhile, insists she'll repay him for helping her. She proudly promises to have her attendants prepare a reward far more valuable than anything he could ask for. The gray-haired boy simply calls her arrogant. His blunt response catches Talia completely off guard. Her cheeks instantly turn red. After all, who dares call the emperor's daughter arrogant? Still, he pays no attention to her reaction and continues walking through the rain-soaked palace gardens until they reach the shelter of a large tree. Noticing her hands tightly clasped together, he asks what she's been holding this entire time. Talia slowly opens her palms, revealing the tiny injured bird covered in wet feathers. The boy quietly studies the fragile creature as she explains that it fell into the muddy water. After a brief silence, he asks another question instead. How long had she been standing there all alone? The question surprises Talia. She simply looks up at him with wide blue eyes, unsure how to answer. The rain continues falling around them as the two remain beneath the tree, surrounded by nothing but silence. Just as the boy seems about to say something else, a familiar voice suddenly calls out from somewhere in the garden. It's Talia's nanny, desperately searching for the missing princess. Relief appears on Talia's face, though she also seems reluctant to leave. The boy gently kneels and places her back on her feet. Before walking away, Talia hesitates for a moment, then stretches out her hands once more. This time, she's offering him the tiny bird. She carefully places the fragile creature into his hands before looking up at him with hopeful eyes and asking if it will survive. The gray-haired boy glances at the bird for a moment before calmly assuring her that it will. Hearing those words is enough for Talia. She smiles and runs toward her nanny, but even as she disappears between the trees, she can't resist looking back one last time. The mysterious boy remains standing beneath the tree, quietly watching her leave. Before she can stop again, her nanny catches up and grabs her by the arm, scolding her for making everyone search the palace before panicking over the sight of her mud-covered dress. The emperor is waiting, so there's no time to waste. As Talia is hurried away, she looks back one final time, but the space beneath the tree is already empty. The mysterious boy has disappeared without a trace. The towering gray spires of the imperial palace rise beneath a sky covered in heavy clouds as servants rush through the halls carrying crates and luggage in every direction. The entire palace is in chaos because the crown prince and the first princess are about to begin their imperial pilgrimage, a sacred rite of passage passed down through the descendants of the great emperor Darien. Every royal must eventually leave on this journey. though princes and princesses begin theirs at different ages. Outside, the final preparations continue as horses are saddled and carriages loaded for the long expedition. Among them stands Barcus, the captain of the Imperial Guard, quietly tending to his horse despite the steady rain. From a palace window high above, Talia silently watches the courtyard below. Her eyes eventually settle on Barcus. Standing alone beneath the rain, he slowly looks up toward the palace windows, his silver hair dripping as water runs down his face. The sight pulls Talia back to a memory she has never been able to forget. She remembers how, after meeting that mysterious silver-haired boy years ago, she spent countless days wandering the palace gardens, hoping he'd appear again. But no matter how often she searched, the boy who had carried her through the rain never returned. Time passes, and one day Talia is walking through the palace with an elderly attendant when the sound of wooden swords colliding echoes through the hallway. Curious, she looks through a nearby window overlooking the training grounds. The moment her eyes land on one particular trainee, she freezes. Standing among the young knights is a boy with familiar silver-gray hair. Talia immediately asks the attendant who he is. The old man explains that the boys below are noble trainees preparing to join the elite Imperial Guard. Without another word, Talia hurries toward the training grounds, unable to hide the hope growing inside her. Around this time, the Emperor finally begins paying attention to his daughter. He orders Talia to start learning proper Imperial etiquette and make up for everything she has missed over the years. Tutors are assigned to her, and she is instructed to attend lessons every day before noon. Although she obeys, her feelings toward the Emperor never change. In her eyes, he is still the man responsible for taking her mother away from her. The following day, Talia walks through the corridor carrying a large book for her lessons. As she reaches the familiar window overlooking the courtyard, her eyes immediately search the training grounds below. There he is. The silver-haired trainee is practicing alongside the other young knights. Wooden swords clash as the trainees spar, their voices echoing across the courtyard. Calm as ever, the boy helps another trainee back onto his feet before wiping the sweat from his forehead and preparing for the next match. Even among the others, he carries himself with a quiet confidence that naturally draws attention. Before she realizes it, Talia has begun looking for him every single day. While her tutors focus on lessons, her eyes often drift back to the training grounds. Watching him brings back memories of that rainy afternoon and the tiny bird they saved together. She quietly wonders whether the bird survived, or whether he ended up burying it instead. Just then, a familiar voice interrupts her thoughts. The Empress, Lady Senevier, approaches from behind and asks what has captured her daughter's attention so completely. Startled by her mother's sudden appearance, Talia struggles to answer. The Empress simply smiles as she looks out the same window. She already knows exactly what her daughter has been staring at. Then she asks a question that catches Talia completely off guard. Do you want that child? The Empress's question leaves little Talia completely speechless. Her cheeks instantly turn bright red as her mother gently lifts her chin to get a better look at her flustered expression. Before Talia can even react, the Empress playfully kisses her on the cheek, leaving the poor girl frozen in place. But the playful mood doesn't last. The Empress's smile remains as elegant as ever, yet something about it suddenly feels unsettling. Looking down at her daughter, she calmly tells Talia that if she truly wants that boy, she can simply give him to her, as if he were nothing more than a gift. Then she quietly adds that such a precious gift would never come for free. Those words send a chill through Talia. Completely overwhelmed, she grabs her lesson book and bolts down the hallway, her footsteps echoing through the palace as she desperately tries to escape. She doesn't even understand why she's running. All she knows is that the woman she longed to see for so many years now fills her with fear. Back when they lived in the Terran household, she could endure everyone else's hatred because her mother was always by her side. But now everything feels different. Her mother is different. The palace is different. Everything feels unfamiliar. That night, Talia cries alone in her enormous bed, wishing someone would simply hold her. And before she falls asleep, her thoughts drift back to the silver-haired boy she met in the rain. Morning arrives, and with it comes another exhausting routine. The maids scrub her skin so roughly that it turns red before dragging brushes through her hair without the slightest bit of care. Every tug makes her flinch, but she quietly endures it all. By the time they're finished, she's dressed in a beautiful purple gown with flowers decorating her hair, looking every bit like an imperial princess. Yet beneath all that elegance is still a lonely little girl. Before long, the maids realize Talia has slipped away again. Assuming she'll eventually return, they continue their duties while the young princess quietly wanders the palace gardens alone. She strolls beneath the long stone arches, occasionally hiding behind trees as she searches every corner of the garden. The hours pass, and the constant walking leaves painful blisters on her feet, but she refuses to stop. Deep down, she keeps asking herself the same question. Why is she so obsessed with finding a boy she only met once? No matter how hard she tries to push the thought away, she can't. She remembers that rainy afternoon so clearly. He could have ignored her completely, yet he chose to help. He ruined his own clothes, climbing into the mud just to rescue her. He carried her without a single complaint, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. Even the memory of the tiny bird they held together still warms her heart. Maybe that single encounter should have been enough. Maybe she should finally give up searching. Just as she's about to turn back, a familiar figure appears between the distant trees. Silver gray hair, a dark cloak. The mysterious boy walks quietly along the garden path, completely unaware that someone has been searching for him all this time. Talia's eyes widen. At long last, she has finally found him. The silver-haired boy continues walking through the garden, calm and completely unaware that someone is chasing after him. The moment Talia sees him, her face lights up with excitement. Without a second thought, she breaks into a run, calling out to him in her tiny voice as her floral crown bounces with every step. She stretches out her hand, desperately trying to catch up, but no matter how fast she runs, he only seems to get farther away. Panting, she wonders why he's in such a hurry. Then, disaster strikes. She trips over the hem of her long dress and stumbles forward. By the time she looks up again, he's gone. The garden path is completely empty. Once again, the mysterious boy has disappeared without a trace, leaving Talia standing there in stunned silence. Feeling defeated, she quietly sits beneath a large tree, resting against its trunk as sunlight filters through the leaves above. She remains there for a while until something catches her attention. Just beyond the trees sits a beautiful fountain surrounded by blooming yellow roses. Beneath a vine-covered gazebo, she spots Barkas enjoying tea with a young black-haired girl. Talia silently watches from a distance as the girl happily chats away, while Barkas listens with a calm, gentle expression. Seeing him smile so naturally at someone else sends an unexpected pain through her chest. Deep down, there's only one thing she wants: for him to look at her the same way. Gathering her courage, Talia slowly walks toward the gazebo. She takes a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm before finally standing in front of them. Looking up at Barkas with hopeful eyes, she wonders if he remembers the little girl he carried through the rain. Maybe he doesn't recognize her because she looked so miserable that day. Before she can even say a word, the black-haired girl suddenly lets out a terrified scream. She immediately hides behind Barkas, crying as she begs him to make Talia leave. She doesn't just want her gone. She wants her banned from ever coming near them again. Talia freezes, completely confused by the girl's reaction. Barkas gently comforts the crying girl before turning toward Talia. The warmth on his face disappears, replaced by a cold, emotionless stare. Without hesitation, he orders Talia to leave. Those few words shatter her heart. Unable to bear the humiliation, she turns around and runs. Tears begin filling her eyes as the garden blurs around her. Then, out of nowhere, a violent blow sends Talia crashing onto the grass. Dazed, she barely manages to look up before a dark-haired boy towers over her with pure hatred in his eyes. It's Prince Gareth. Furious that someone like her dared enter the palace, he begins kicking her over and over while screaming that she should just die. The assault only stops when the attendants rush in and pull the prince away by force. Even as they restrain him, Gareth continues shouting that the filthy, illegitimate child should disappear from this world, while Talia curls up on the ground, trembling in fear. Back in her room, Talia quietly overhears the servants whispering among themselves. They insist that Prince Gareth had every right to be furious, since the former Empress Bernadette had died only 6 months earlier. Another maid quickly warns them to lower their voices, but the damage is already done. Standing silently by the window, Talia finally realizes the truth. The 2 children who treated her with so much hatred are actually her own half-brother and half-sister. She remembers how her mother entered the palace and replaced the former empress, erasing every trace of the woman who came before her. Suddenly, that peaceful afternoon in the garden with Barkas no longer feels like a happy memory. It only reminds her how far away that warmth truly is. Rain begins falling over the palace as Talia quietly sits on her bed, whispering one name to herself: Barkas Lados Sayarkhan. She had only recently learned who he was. A distant relative of the former Empress Bernadette, someone she had cared for deeply. His face flashes through her mind, followed immediately by the painful memories of being beaten and called a filthy bastard. Hugging her knees, Talia wonders why she's the one being punished when she never did anything wrong. She doesn't understand the palace's politics. All she knows is that everyone hates her. Night after night, she cries herself to sleep in a room far too large for a lonely little girl. The freezing bathwater, the maid scrubbing her skin until it hurt. The endless hostile stares. Every day feels worse than the last. Even as her mother tells her she's the child of true love and should ignore what others say, the palace refuses to let her forget. One day, she overhears maids claiming the former empress didn't deserve such a painful death before cruelly calling Talia nothing more than the product of a filthy affair. Hidden behind a stone pillar, she listens until she can't bear another word, then quietly runs away. The servants notice she'd heard everything, but none of them seem to care. Things only get worse during mealtime. One afternoon, Talia is surprised to find a bowl of warm soup waiting for her. The food is fresh, plentiful, and for the first time in a long while, it actually looks appetizing. She notices an unusual number of attendants watching from the sides of the dining hall and begins wondering if they've finally stopped punishing her. Hope slowly returns as she takes a careful sip. The soup is warm and delicious. Then she notices something floating inside. Her entire body freezes. The room falls silent as every servant stares directly at her. Smirks begin spreading across their faces while Talia slowly lowers her spoon back into the bowl. Looking closer, she discovers a dead, rotting rat hidden inside the soup. The warm meal was never an act of kindness. It was another cruel joke. Overcome with horror, she gags and bursts into tears, realizing that even in the grandest palace in the empire, she can't eat without someone trying to torment her. The days continue passing in endless misery until she grows so weak that even her appearance begins to change. When the Empress Genevieve finally visits her room, she immediately notices how pale and frail Talia has become. Sitting beside her daughter, she learns the heartbreaking truth. Talia has barely survived by secretly eating the small amounts of fruit and honey her nanny could bring her. Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, the little girl clings tightly to her mother's gown and breaks down in tears. Between sobs, she explains that everyone in the palace constantly insults both of them and begs her mother to make the bullying stop. More than anything else, Talia just wants to live somewhere she doesn't have to be afraid anymore. Empress Genevieve looks down at her crying daughter without the slightest hint of sympathy. Instead of comforting Talia, she asks a question that completely catches the little girl off guard. Why should she stop the servants? Talia can only stare at her in disbelief. Genevieve calmly lifts her chin and reminds her that the entire palace belongs to the imperial family. Those servants are beneath her. She's the emperor's daughter, so why is she allowing insignificant people to treat her like this? Disappointment fills the empress's voice as she criticizes Talia for being weak. Then she reveals that she has spent years taming a certain man who will soon become Talia's personal guard. According to her, he'll be useful. But Talia immediately rejects the idea, insisting she doesn't need anyone like that. Even then, Genevieve's expression never changes. Looking directly into her daughter's eyes, she decides to teach her one final lesson. Power isn't built on kindness. People obey because they're afraid. Some may respect her, others may secretly hate her, but none of them dare act because they fear the consequences. That's why she's untouchable. Before leaving, the Empress gives Talia one last warning. In the Imperial Palace, being beautiful without strength only makes you an easier target. That night, Talia lies awake replaying every word her mother said. As she shivers beneath her blanket, she slowly accepts a painful truth. No one is coming to save her. Looking back, she realizes her frightened eyes, trembling voice, and constant fear only encouraged the servants to keep tormenting her. Every time she acted like a helpless victim, they became even bolder. Quietly clenching her fists, Talia makes up her mind. If kindness only attracts cruelty, then she'll become someone no one dares to bully again. The next morning, she looks into the mirror and barely recognizes herself. Thin, pale, and exhausted. She even compares her own appearance to the dead rat she found floating in her soup. When a servant approaches to help her wash, Talia coldly refuses. The maid freezes in surprise as the princess immediately calls for her nanny instead. The moment the nanny arrives, Talia announces that from now on, she'll be the only one responsible for helping her dress and prepare each day. When another servant tries to object, Talia silences her with a single glare, asking if she's planning to disobey an order from the Empress herself. No one dares answer. Even the nanny isn't spared. When she accidentally addresses Talia improperly, the young princess slaps her across the face and warns that if she ever calls her "my lady" instead of "your highness" again, the next punishment will be even worse. Just then, the palace doors open, revealing a quiet, black-haired boy waiting outside. Talia studies him for a moment before realizing this must be the guard her mother promised her. Without asking any questions, she simply orders him to follow. Together, they head straight to the dining hall, where the servants quickly prepare her meal. The atmosphere is noticeably tense as Talia calmly takes her seat. Then, to everyone's surprise, she points at one of the maids and orders her to sit beside her. The woman nervously refuses, claiming she still has too much work to do before turning to leave. Big mistake. Without warning, Talia grabs a heavy jug from the table and hurls it straight at the maid's head. The jug shatters on impact, sending the woman crashing to the floor as blood begins running down the side of her face. The rest of the servants stand frozen in horror. Completely unfazed, Talia orders her new guard to drag the injured maid into the chair beside her. As the terrified woman is forced into her seat, Talia calmly explains that since the maid works so hard preparing meals every day, she has decided to share today's meal with her. Then she looks the trembling maid directly in the eyes and gives a single command: eat. Talia's new guard firmly pins the terrified maid to her chair, while the young princess watches without a trace of sympathy. Seeing the woman hesitate, Talia raises her voice and orders her to eat the food immediately. Realizing the princess isn't bluffing, the maid desperately struggles to escape, but the guard slams her back into place before she can move. Through tears, the maid begs for forgiveness, promising she'll never do anything like this again. Talia isn't moved. She calmly tells her that she's already being merciful by letting her live. If the maid wants to leave the room unharmed, she'll finish every single bite. The woman continues trembling in fear, unable to force herself to eat. Losing what little patience she has left, Talia reaches for the table knife and orders her guard to place the maid's hand on the table. As the blade hovers over her fingers, Talia warns that if she's going to keep ignoring a direct order, then she'll lose a finger instead. That threat finally breaks her. The maid immediately grabs the spoon and begins stuffing the food into her mouth, gagging and choking with every bite while Talia coldly orders her to empty the entire bowl. Only after it's completely finished does she tell the servants to clean everything up and bring fresh food. From that day onward, the bullying comes to an end. No one in the palace dares treat Talia the same way again, and rumors of the young princess spread throughout the imperial palace. Not long afterward, Empress Senevere comes to see her daughter. This time, she's genuinely pleased. Smiling proudly, she tells Talia that she's earned a reward for finally learning how to survive in the palace. Talia hesitates as her mother reaches toward her, unsure how to react. Then Senevere gently cups her cheek and announces that it's time for her reward. She gestures toward someone standing nearby. A tall knight dressed in brilliant white and gold armor steps forward. The moment Talia sees his silver-gray hair, her heart skips a beat. It's him. The mysterious boy from the rain. Standing before her now, he formally introduces himself as Barkas Leto Sirkan. His voice is calm, respectful, and completely emotionless. He informs the princess that from this day forward, he'll serve as her personal guard until she comes of age. Talia can barely process what she's hearing. Memories immediately flood back. She remembers the rainy day when he carried her in his arms, the moment he protected the little bird. Then, another memory replaces it. Barkas standing beside her half-sister, Barkas coldly ordering her to leave. Gareth attacking her while Barkas did nothing to stop it. All of those memories collide at once. With everything that's happened between them, how could she possibly greet him kindly? Instead, Talia raises her chin and coldly orders him not to look down on her. She demands that he greet her properly, and questions whether he's forgotten the correct way to show respect to an imperial princess. Barkas doesn't react in the slightest. His expression remains as unreadable as ever. Without a single complaint, he calmly lowers himself onto one knee and bows his head before her, formally pledging his loyalty to the young princess. Talia silently watches the boy she'd searched for all this time, now kneeling before her as her knight. Years have passed as the story returns to the present-day Riam Empire. The palace is bustling with activity as servants and workers rush about, packing supplies and preparing for the journey of Barkas and the first princess. In the courtyard, Barkas tends to his horse while the princess watches him from a short distance with several maids. The maids quietly encourage her to go and speak to him. As she watches him, she notices how much more human he seems compared to when they first met. Back then, he had been as empty as the discarded shell of an insect. Barkas entered the imperial palace at a very young age, where priests subjected him to harsh, brainwashing-like training to mold him into the empire's perfect servant. In the process, he lost not only his joy, anger, sorrow, and pleasure, but even most of his basic human desires. He became someone who moved only when ordered, an empty shell that no longer cared to eat or sleep. Once this mission is complete, he will leave the Imperial Guard and begin the succession process to become the next Grand Duke of House Sirkan. Although Barkas is always polite and occasionally even seems affectionate, it still feels unreal to the princess that he is destined to become her husband. He was once just a little boy who faithfully stayed by her late mother's side. Even though their marriage was arranged to strengthen a political alliance, she will one day become his wife and bear his heir. She believes that if she patiently pours her affection into him over the years, perhaps his frozen heart will eventually melt. Gathering her courage, she approaches him. Barkas notices her and calmly asks what brings her there. She says she simply wanted to know how the preparations were progressing. He assures her that they are almost complete, although the work has taken longer than expected. With the days growing hotter, he remarks that the journey ahead will likely be exhausting. The princess apologizes, explaining that Gareth kept adding more items to the list of supplies, delaying the preparations. Barkas gently tells her there is no need to apologize. It was something that had to be done eventually, and compared to what he had expected, Gareth's behavior was rather mild. Considering he was sending off his precious sister, Barkas admits he had prepared himself for far worse. Even so, the princess cannot hide her concern. She quietly wonders how Gareth will be able to stand against that cunning woman all by himself. After a brief silence, the princess shyly admits that she would still like to visit the imperial palace from time to time, even after their marriage. To her, the request sounds childish since she knows she will have countless responsibilities once she becomes the lady of House Sirkan. Barkas tells her she is free to come and go whenever she wishes, provided the journey is not too difficult for her. After all, this marriage was arranged to strengthen His Highness's position. Relieved by his understanding, she asks if she may borrow a little of his time before they depart. The two walk into the palace garden, where she presents him with a carefully embroidered handkerchief bearing the crest of House Sirkan. It is a long-standing tradition to give one's fiancé a handmade handkerchief before setting off on a journey. Even though they would both be traveling together, she still wanted to give him something special. Barkas looks at the gift with quiet surprise. He admits that he does not feel worthy of receiving something so precious, but promises to cherish it. Just then, a royal guard hurries over and urgently informs Barkas that His Majesty has summoned him immediately. The sudden summons catches them both off guard. The princess immediately suspects that this may be Senevere's doing. She believes the Empress is plotting something. The pilgrimage had been approved by the Imperial Council, and their marriage had long been supported by the conservative nobles. Whatever scheme Senevere was planning, she should not be able to overturn it. After all, Senevere was the one who had kept the newly knighted Barkas tied to Talia's side for 7 long years, despite his position as the future Grand Duke of House Sirkan, all to drive a wedge between Gareth and Barkas. Convinced that Senevere is trying to persuade the Emperor once again, the princess decides to accompany him. As they make their way to the audience hall, an old tale comes to the princess's mind. Long ago, in a certain village, two brothers loved each other dearly. One day, a demon that hated everything good in the world placed a massive lump of gold before them. Blinded by its brilliance, the brothers fought over the treasure until they eventually destroyed one another. Standing within the audience hall, Genevieve appears in an elegant golden gown adorned with an elaborate golden headdress that resembles a pair of horns. To the princess, Genevieve is that very demon. Like gold given human form, she blinded the heart of a once honorable emperor, filled a woman's life with endless sorrow, and forced both the princess and her brother Gareth to live in grief and humiliation. As though that were not enough, she also gave birth to Prince Azroth, whose very existence threatens Gareth's position as heir. Many nobles, unsettled by the emperor's increasingly volatile temper, have already begun placing their hopes on the young prince. Genevieve notices the princess's arrival and calmly asks why she has failed to show proper courtesy to his majesty. The princess respectfully explains that she accompanied Sir Barkus because she wished to see her father. She apologizes for arriving without prior notice. The emperor gently tells her that she is welcome to visit him whenever she wishes. His warm response brings a faint smile to her face. Seeing the opportunity, Genevieve remarks that it is best to reveal the news now, as it is something the first princess would eventually learn anyway. The emperor explains that he summoned Barkas because the arrangements for the pilgrimage have changed. Talia will also be joining the pilgrimage. He instructs Barkas to deploy additional guards where necessary and ensure that Talia's travel equipment is prepared alongside theirs. Both Barkas and the first princess are visibly taken aback. Unable to hide her confusion, the princess asks why Talia would be accompanying them when tradition dictates that only women preparing for marriage undertake the pilgrimage. Genevieve calmly answers that Talia may also be getting married soon. The revelation leaves the first princess completely stunned. Even though Talia was born illegitimate, she is still an imperial princess whose name is recorded in the imperial lineage. A marriage arrangement involving her could never be made without informing the imperial family. Barkas remarks that the timing of the proposal is rather coincidental. Genevieve calmly explains that the offer only arrived recently, so no formal engagement has been made. However, she and His Majesty are considering it favorably. With so many auspicious events taking place within the imperial family, she believes it is truly a cause for celebration. Curious, Barkas asks who the fortunate groom is. Genevieve replies that he has likely heard the name before. The man in question is Count Verdane Sarian, the head of House Sarian. Having long since come of age, it is only natural that he should marry now, making him a suitable match for Talia. Ayla is left speechless. Verdane Sarian was once one of Genevieve's admirers during her days as Lady Terran and was known for being her longest-standing suitor. The thought of Genevieve marrying her own daughter to a man who once pursued her is simply unbelievable. Thinking back, Ayla also recalls that Count Sarian was the one who escorted Talia during the banquet. The emperor then states that since everything has been decided, Talia should begin preparing for the pilgrimage immediately. Barkas places his right hand over his chest and respectfully acknowledges His Majesty's command before taking his leave with Ayla. As they walk away, Ayla still cannot believe Talia is being sent off so suddenly. She is convinced Genevieve is plotting something and that the marriage is merely a convenient excuse. Barkas, however, appears completely unbothered by the situation. Unable to understand his calm reaction, Ayla asks how he can remain so composed when the Empress is clearly scheming. Does he truly intend to send Talia away without questioning anything? Barkas quietly asks what she expects him to do. Surely she is not asking him to defy His Majesty's orders. The Emperor is the ruler of the Empire, and he swore his loyalty to the imperial family long ago. From the very beginning, obedience has always been his duty. Besides, isn't unquestioning loyalty exactly what the imperial family has always demanded from the nobility? Realizing she has upset him, Ayla quickly wraps her arms around him from behind and apologizes. She admits her anxiety got the better of her and she unfairly took it out on him. She begs him not to push her away so coldly. Barkas gently assures her there is no reason to worry. No matter what scheme the Empress devises, Ayla will never come to harm. Long ago, he swore to the late Empress that he would protect both her and Gareth for as long as he possessed the strength to do so. Barkas has a way of unsettling people with his words, only to calm them again with the same quiet indifference. To Ayla, titles such as pride, dignity, and authority as a princess suddenly feel meaningless. Even after spending more than a decade together, his embrace has never once felt truly warm. Even so, she believes that as long as Barkas remains by their side, there is nothing to fear. Elsewhere, Talia sits alone, deep in thought. She realizes she has lost her greatest trump card. The small wound she inflicted on her noble brother has most likely already been healed completely by a priest. She would have preferred to use that opportunity against Ayla instead, especially whenever she saw the way Ayla looked at Barkas. The room feels unbearably hot. Since Barkas is nowhere nearby, she considers stepping outside. Just then, a knock sounds at her door. It is her younger brother, Azroth. She allows him to enter and asks what brings him there. Azroth smiles and tells her he secretly slipped out of the castle just to see her. His answer surprises her. Although they share the same parents, their lives could not be more different. Talia is the product of a scandalous affair, while Azroth is the legitimate prince born after the Emperor and Empress were officially married. This is the first time she has seen him up close since his baptism as an infant. Their mother had never allowed her anywhere near him, fearing what she might do. Talia asks if he came alone, warning that their mother would not be pleased if she found out. Azroth shakes his head and says he came with Barons. Curious, Talia asks why he wanted to see her. Azroth explains that he heard she would soon be leaving on a long journey. Surprised, Talia asks what else their mother told him. Azroth replies that Senevier said Talia would be joining the pilgrimage and that she would soon be getting married because Count Sarian had sent a marriage proposal. The expression on Talia's face darkens instantly. Seeing the sudden tension, Barons instinctively steps closer to Azroth. Talia assumes her little brother came simply to congratulate her and happily bid farewell to the troublesome sister who would soon be married off and sent away from the imperial palace. Azroth quickly denies it. He reminds her that they are siblings who share the same mother. Once she marries, it will become even harder for them to meet than it already is. Before that happens, he simply wanted to spend some time with her. He always hoped they could become close, just as Gareth and Isla are. Talia stares at him in silence. He is the beloved prince, born from the rightful union between the emperor and empress. Because of his existence, she has become completely worthless in the eyes of the palace, nothing more than an ugly stain upon a perfect picture. She coldly asks whether he expects her to devote herself entirely to helping him, just as the first princess dedicates everything to ensuring Gareth ascends the throne. Azroth can only stare at her in stunned disbelief. Talia continues, saying that even if he had never come to see her, their mother had undoubtedly already planned to use her for his benefit. Her marriage was almost certainly arranged because it would somehow strengthen Azroth's position. Since that is the case, he should abandon those meaningless expectations. Raised under constant protection, Azroth has probably never spent a single night in fear or experienced open hostility from those around him. Talia has no intention whatsoever of becoming a loving and devoted sister. She hates him just as much as she hates Gareth and Ayla. If he understands that, then he should leave her sight immediately. At dawn the following morning, Talia makes her way toward her mother's study. She hurries through the palace corridors before entering the room, where Senevier is already waiting. Without wasting a moment, Talia informs her mother that Azroth came to see her the previous day. Senevier does not even look at Talia. Even after Talia reveals that Azroth was the one who informed her about the marriage and the pilgrimage, her mother offers no reaction. Instead, Senevier quietly notes that she had not realized Azroth had taken an interest in Talia. Her mother's silence only makes Talia more anxious. She demands to know why she had to hear news of her own marriage and the pilgrimage from Azroth. Convinced that Senevier is plotting something, she presses for answers. The Empress calmly replies that Talia is already of marriageable age. Since a suitable proposal arrived, she simply decided to move things along. Talia is horrified that, of all people, she is being matched with Count Sarian. Senevier assures her that Sarian has been thoroughly vetted. He is capable of fulfilling the role of a husband, exceptionally talented, and willing to devote himself entirely to her if she desires. Talia refuses outright. She declares that she would rather bite off her own tongue and die than allow Sarian to lay a hand on her. Unmoved, Senevier replies that she can simply find another groom instead, revealing that she has already narrowed down a list of suitable candidates. To Talia, however, the list is nothing more than a collection of Senevier's fanatical followers. Talia declares that she does not want to marry anyone and tells her mother to stop pretending to care. She asks to be left alone, just as she always has been. Senevier points out that Talia's heart belongs to only one man, the heir to House Sihyogan. If she wanted him that badly, she should have claimed him by any means necessary. She reminds Talia that Barkas remained by her side for 7 years, yet she never acted on her feelings. Talia is stunned that her mother already knows. In only a few months, the man she loves will belong to another woman, yet she has done nothing except watch. Talia has no reply. The Empress explains that everything she has arranged was for Talia's sake, to give her a way out of her misery. She says Talia has only 2 choices: seize the man she desires no matter what it takes, or settle for becoming a loser who is only slightly less pathetic. Senevier states that she herself chose the first path and obtained everything she ever wanted. But if Talia lacks the strength to do the same, then she should settle for the second option, accept a merely satisfactory life and pretend to be just as happy as the victor. Though such a choice is pitiful, if she is destined to lose, she should at least preserve her pride. The upcoming journey is the final chance she has been given. Senevier advises her to think carefully about which path she wishes to take. Deep in thought, Talia quietly leaves the room. The next day, preparations for the pilgrimage enter their final stage. Talia's mountain of luggage catches the attention of the Imperial Knight Edric Ruban, who asks if she truly intends to bring all of it. She asks whether he has a problem with that. Ruban says he understands her desire to maintain royal dignity, but the countless dresses and accessories are excessive. Unless she plans to change outfits 5 times a day, there is no reason to carry so much. Talia thinks the newly assigned knight simply does not know any better and is far too blunt. She replies that, if possible, she would change outfits 10 times a day. Sitting inside a carriage all day would leave her feeling dirty, and she refuses to wear soiled clothes even for a moment. Ruban remains unconvinced. Even then, Talia is dissatisfied with the jewelry she has packed. She believes she needs even more if she hopes to outshine Ayla. She briefly considers stealing the diamond necklace the Emperor gifted Ayla, or better yet, taking the entire jewelry box. Mother would probably have lent it to her anyway. since she seems determined to break off Ayla's engagement. She had also tried to bring additional attendants, but Gareth opposed the idea, forcing her to abandon it. Besides, she never wanted her mother's fanatical servants in the first place. Still, she refuses to appear ordinary. Determined, Talia decides to visit the Empress's palace and take more jewels. Just then, a familiar voice asks Ruban whether she has finished preparing for departure. It is Barkas. Ruban informs him that they will likely need an extra carriage solely for Talia's luggage. Barkas walks over with his usual expressionless face and calmly states that the procession will pass through 6 major cities. She can purchase whatever she needs along the journey, so there is no reason to bring unnecessary baggage. Talia immediately objects, insisting that she cannot know what she may need later. Barkas explains that the northwestern regions are filled with prosperous commercial cities. She will have countless opportunities to shop, so she should refrain from overburdening the servants before the journey has even begun. Talia still refuses. She accuses Barkas of trying to make her look like a disgraceful princess obsessed with luxury so people can compare her unfavorably to Ayla. He looks at her with mild surprise and asks when she suddenly started caring about her reputation. To begin with, no one has ever placed her and the first princess on the same level, so she should stop worrying about meaningless comparisons. Furious, Talia swings her right hand to slap him. Barkas catches her wrist effortlessly. Without acknowledging her anger, he orders the servants to keep only the essentials and unload everything else. Talia lashes out with her other hand, but he catches that one as well. Still holding both wrists with ease, he announces that they will depart in 15 minutes and orders everyone to hurry. Talia struggles furiously against his grip, shouting that someone like him has no right to decide what she can or cannot bring. She mocks him for acting important when he is not even the Grand Duke yet, merely an imperial knight. Barkas ignores every word. He simply repeats his order for the servants to unload the luggage immediately. The authority of the future Grand Duke of the East and commander of the Imperial Guard far outweighs that of an imperial princess. Nothing makes it clearer that Talia is a princess in name only. She threatens every servant present, declaring that if a single item is removed, she will have their heads. Ignoring her threats completely, Barkas lifts her into his arms and walks away. Talia freezes in disbelief as the knight handles her with such blunt physical force. Thus, she is unceremoniously thrown onto the padded seat inside the carriage. Barkas leans over her, using his weight to pin her down. The silver-haired knight coldly orders her to sit still as his shadow looms over her. In that moment, Talia realizes her royal status means absolutely nothing to him, and the humiliation burns deep. Resentment wells up as she imagines how differently he would treat her mother. Barkas looks down at her with piercing blue eyes devoid of mercy. Talia stares back in silent fury, her face flushed with equal parts rage and fear. He brushes the red mark on his cheek where she struck him earlier, and calmly states that this is simply the consequence of her laying hands on him. He declares that he will no longer indulge her childish tantrums, keeping her firmly pinned against the carriage bench. The two remain only inches apart as silence fills the cramped carriage. Click. The carriage door slams shut, trapping Talia inside. She curls up on the bench, clutching her chest as she struggles to swallow the humiliation. Through the window, she watches servants dismantle her carefully packed luggage. She considers lashing out again but quickly abandons the thought, knowing Barkas would simply overpower her once more. His icy expression continues to haunt her thoughts. Rustle. The heavy curtains are drawn closed, plunging the carriage into darkness. Talia slowly sinks onto the floor, overwhelmed by her own helplessness. A narrow beam of sunlight spills through the window, illuminating her lonely figure. The ornate white carriage wheels begin to turn, marking the official beginning of the pilgrimage. Clatter. The royal procession departs the palace courtyard. Talia's face becomes completely expressionless as she prepares for the long journey ahead. Peering through a small gap in the curtains, she silently wishes the entire procession would march straight into hell. The endless line of horses and carriages rolls onward beneath her hopeless thoughts. She believes nothing could make her happier than seeing everything come to an end. The narration explains that the pilgrimage follows the same route once traveled by Darien, the Empire's founding emperor. A peaceful river flows beside the ancient road as the imperial procession advances. An old map illustrates the 10 kingdoms that once divided the continent before unification. History recounts how Darien roamed Girto, fled invading forces before returning years later to unite the Central Lands. Images of cavalry charging across blood-soaked battlefields reveal the Empire's violent birth. Through 20 years of relentless warfare, Darien united countless tribes and forged the empire. Cheers erupt as the emperor's descendants are presented before the people. A knight atop a magnificent white horse leads the procession through streets showered with colorful confetti. Elite soldiers stand proudly in formation while citizens shout blessings upon the imperial family. Yet Talia continues staring blankly through her carriage window, completely unmoved by the ceremony's historical significance. The first prince smiles and waves warmly to the roaring crowd. The beautiful first princess gracefully greets the citizens from her ornate carriage as countless voices praise her elegance and beauty. Hundreds of commoners line both sides of the streets, stretching out their hands to bless the passing royal family. Clatter. The procession winds through city streets overflowing with spectators. Murmurs begin spreading as Talia's carriage passes. Citizens recognize the second princess and quietly whisper insults about her illegitimate birth and notorious reputation. Edric Ruban overhears the gossip, describing the princess's violent temper and history of abusing servants. Riding alongside her carriage, he politely asks why she refuses to open the curtains and greet the waiting citizens. The curtains never move. An awkward silence follows. Edric assumes she is still sulking after the confrontation at the palace. Looking back toward the closed carriage, he thinks her terrible personality completely overshadows her naturally beautiful face. He cannot help wondering how many men would adore her if only she possessed a kinder disposition. He also wonders how many guards must have resigned before Barkis somehow endured 7 years by her side. The image of Barkis carrying the struggling princess earlier flashes through his mind. Riding ahead without looking back, the silver-haired knight remains completely detached from the gossip surrounding the procession. Edric concludes that Talia's behavior must have been unbearable to drive even someone as loyal as Barkis that far. With a tired sigh, the imperial procession finally leaves the city behind and enters the open countryside. As evening falls, the group arrives beside a peaceful riverside where camp preparations begin. 2 knights organize the night's duties, assigning soldiers to prepare dinner and set up the royal encampment. Moments later, fine jewels shimmer beneath the fading sunlight as Talia steps gracefully from her carriage. Whoa. Edric blurts out in astonishment as she appears wearing an extravagant purple gown fit for a grand royal banquet rather than a campsite. Confused, he asks why the princess is dressed so lavishly just to spend the night outdoors. Standing beside the flickering campfire, Talia's long blonde hair glows brilliantly beneath the sunset. Even the hardened knights pause as they take in her breathtaking appearance. Her expression, however, remains distant and emotionless, making her resemble a tragic queen standing alone in the wilderness. The wind gently catches her hair as she turns, leaving several knights momentarily speechless. Even Edric struggles to regain his composure, swallowing hard as he faces the undeniably beautiful yet impossible princess. Breaking the silence, Talia coldly announces that she dislikes the location chosen for the camp. Edric freezes in disbelief. Without hesitation, she orders everyone to dismantle the camp immediately and move somewhere else, leaving the stunned knight asking her what exactly is wrong with the current location. Exhaustion washes over Edric as he realizes the princess is being exactly as difficult as he feared. Edric explains that the royal guard chose the spot for safety, and it cannot be moved now. Talia's eyes narrow with irritation as she snaps at the knight for offering his unasked for opinion. Raising her voice, the princess commands the knight to obey her order and relocate the camp immediately. Edric reminds her that Lord Barkis holds final authority over every decision throughout the journey. Talia stalks away in anger while Edric warns her that she cannot leave the formation on her own. A steady step echoes as the princess ignores his warning, walking deeper into the campsite. Edric wonders if she is simply looking for another excuse to fight with Lord Barkis. He asks why she insists on causing trouble, prompting Talia to complain about the insects and the forest being too close. Chirp, chirp. Birds continue singing as Talia rants that the birds and rustling leaves will keep her awake all night. She glares at the knight, her patience exhausted by every natural sound around the riverside. Edric struggles to explain that everyone must adapt while scratching at a fresh insect bite on his arm. Talia repeats her demand to move the camp, but Edric argues that the exhausted men cannot wander around searching for another location. Staring coldly at him, Talia listens as Edric tells her to stop being childish and return to her carriage to rest. Slap. Talia strikes Edric across the face, her long blonde hair swaying with the force of her movement. The stunned knight touches the fresh mark on his cheek as Talia questions his audacity to give her orders. She grabs Edric by the collar, declaring that she is the Emperor's daughter and that he exists solely for her convenience. She menacingly promises that if she orders him to walk through the night, then he will continue walking until dawn. Talia releases his collar with a dismissive shove before turning her back on his shocked expression. Edric remains standing in disbelief as the princess storms away toward the tents, her elegant purple gown trailing behind her. Secretly, he wishes he could throw her into the carriage the same way Barkis had earlier, lamenting that he lacks the authority to do so. He wonders whether he can survive the princess's tyranny for the rest of the long pilgrimage. Talia glares at the servants around the camp, who instinctively flinch as she passes by in a rage. Her heart races as she prepares to confront Barkis, knowing his response will be very different from everyone else's. She reminds herself that the camps must remain separated to make it harder for her mother's spies to scheme. Walking past a grazing horse, she heads toward the largest tent marked with imperial banners as night settles over the camp. Inside, the tent is modestly furnished with a simple bed and a white partition dividing the room. Entering with determined strides, Talia repeats her demand for the campsite to be moved immediately. She pulls aside the partition curtain with a sharp rustle. Standing beyond it is a shirtless Barkis. Fresh from bathing, the silver-haired knight calmly dries himself with a towel, meeting the princess's gaze with complete indifference. Talia lets out a quiet gasp, momentarily stunned by the sight of his muscular bare torso. Barkis reflects that it is rare to see her this speechless ever since he disciplined her at the age of 14. Looking down at her, he remarks that hearing her lecture anyone about hierarchy is almost laughable. He begins dressing without paying her any further attention while she watches in a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Barkis calmly explains that hierarchy exists to command one's own subordinates. Talia insists that every knight should obey an imperial princess without question. She orders him to inform his men that her commands take precedence over everyone else's throughout the pilgrimage. Receiving no response, Talia turns to leave, threatening to have him flogged for his disrespect. She storms out of the tent. Outside, disbelief overwhelms her as she realizes Barkas is completely ignoring everything she says. She shouts after him, demanding to know whether all her words simply enter one ear and leave the other. His steady footsteps continue without pause, his silence only fueling her anger further. Her face burns with rage and desperation as she screams for him to at least get angry. Rushing forward, she grabs hold of his dark cloak, refusing to let him walk away. Talia accuses him of secretly plotting against her and enjoying the fact that he no longer has to endure her commands. She rants that he does not even pretend to listen anymore. Without changing expression, Barkas replies that he might pretend to listen if her words were actually worth hearing. Humiliation crashes over Talia. For a fleeting moment, she wishes the miserable man would simply disappear from the world. Bitterly, she asks whether her voice even sounds like human speech to him. Mocking him further, she says perhaps she should speak the language of beasts instead, insulting the knight's barbarian ancestry as nearby servants silently watch. Barkas remains silent, his shadow stretching across the frightened onlookers. Talia sneers that horse noises would suit him better, considering he clearly prefers animals to people. She rants that even her stallion understands her better because it does not whine and make everyone around it miserable. She asks whether Barkas has become so arrogant simply because he believes no one can be as violent as he is. Finally, she demands to know what he could possibly understand about her. As the campfire flickers in her blue eyes, Talia reflects that no one understands the ugliness of humanity better than she does. She believes the only way to survive is to become merciless before others can trample her. Barkas lets out a slow breath and tells her he has no intention of continuing such pointless bickering. He refuses to justify his decisions and simply instructs her to stop making a fuss despite her continued cries about her royal status. At last, Barkas turns to face her. His patience exhausted, the silver-haired knight towers over the princess and firmly tells her that enough is enough. Talia falls completely silent as he orders her to know when to stop. Without another glance, Barkas walks away. He instructs the guards to escort the princess back to her quarters while she remains standing in stunned disbelief. Beneath the star-filled night sky, the silver-haired knight disappears into the darkness. Grinding her teeth, Talia watches him leave, secretly wishing for his death. She reflects that once this pilgrimage ends, he will marry another woman regardless of whether she survives the journey. As dawn breaks, the royal pilgrimage continues far more smoothly than anyone had expected. The peaceful morning camp remains bloodless, as Talia notes that Barkas is still breathing just fine. The procession continues north through Sortika, a small city nestled in the empire's northwestern region. Clatter. A maid gently sets tea and pastries before the princess. Sitting alone inside her carriage, Talia maintains a cold, vigilant gaze through the window. She resolves to remain suspicious of every attendant sent by her mother. Dark, tangled thoughts fill her mind, reflecting her fear of the endless conspiracies surrounding the empress. A brief memory flashes of a dark-haired woman and a silver-haired man standing beneath blooming flowers. Resting her chin on one hand, Talia watches the passing scenery with quiet boredom. The carriage rolls onward while the blonde princess remains isolated in luxurious confinement. That night, beneath a crescent moon, Talia reflects on how much easier life would be without Barkas. Sleep refuses to come as she lies awake clutching her blankets. Finally, she sits on the edge of her bed, moonlight illuminating her long blonde hair. Trembling slightly, she covers her mouth as her emotions threaten to overwhelm her. Tap. Talia decides she must personally confirm that Barkas is still alive. Moving quietly through the moonlit forest, she passes her stallion peacefully grazing beneath the trees. Soon, she finds Barkas kneeling beside the river, sharing a quiet moment with one of the horses. Hidden behind dense bushes, the princess watches him with stunned curiosity. The silver-haired knight gently rests his forehead against the horse, appearing more peaceful than she has ever seen him. His eyes remain closed as he savors the rare silence. Nuzzle. The horse affectionately nudges Barkas, completely unaware of the princess secretly observing them. Talia's face flushes as she witnesses this unexpectedly gentle side of the man she claims to hate, Russell. Barkas suddenly lifts his head toward the bushes, sensing someone's presence. Startled, Talia retreats behind a massive tree trunk, struggling to steady her breathing. Leaning against the rough bark, she feels a painful obsession growing inside her like an incurable disease. Convinced she should leave immediately, she prepares to return to her tent. Then she stops. Not far away sits a dark-haired woman. Gasp. Talia freezes in shock. Barkas is not alone. The woman is Ayla. Ayla smiles warmly, commenting that the cool night suits him. Russell. She slips off her simple leather shoes. Splash. Her bare feet dip into the cool water as she sighs contentedly beneath the star-filled sky. Barkas watches her with a soft, attentive expression Talia has never once seen directed toward herself. Hidden among the shadows, Talia stares in disbelief. Barkas notices the night growing colder and quietly kneels beside Ayla. Taking her feet into his hands, he gently warms them. That simple act shatters Talia. Russell! She spins around and sprints into the darkness. Thud. The princess trips over a fallen log in her frantic escape. Crash! Birds scatter into the night sky as she stumbles deeper into the forest, her long blonde hair flowing wildly behind her. Finally collapsing onto the ground, Talia trembles with humiliation, fear, and despair. Gasping for breath, she imagines her mother looking upon her current state with complete contempt. Her mother's words echo through her mind: seize the man you desire, or become a loser who is only slightly less miserable. Lying in the dirt, Talia realizes she can never become someone as ruthless as Empress Senevere. Exhausted and disheveled, she silently prays for her unbearable emotional pain to finally end. Princess! Voices call through the darkness as the Imperial guards begin searching for the missing princess. A dark-haired knight finally finds her beneath the pale moonlight. Scolding her, he reminds her never to wander alone without an escort. Talia stands motionless, listening with an empty expression as he asks whether she was harmed, genuine concern visible on his face. She notices that his worry appears sincere. Even so, she refuses to trust it. Coldly, she accuses him of merely following orders to prevent her from causing trouble during the pilgrimage. She asks why he blames her instead of blaming himself for failing to watch her properly. Thud! Talia slams the carriage door shut, crushing the knight's fingers. Ignoring his cries of pain, she calmly draws the curtain closed, deciding that she will no longer allow anyone else's opinions to affect her. If she had listened to others throughout her childhood, she believes she would have gone completely insane long ago. The following morning, beneath a bright blue sky, the imperial procession arrives at the monastery of Morduin. The blonde abbot, Vasilis, warmly welcomes the imperial visitors. The crown prince curiously asks whether the abbot is truly a demi-human. Vasilis calmly confirms that he is, explaining that demi-humans are quite common throughout the empire's northeastern territories. As the grand procession enters the monastery grounds, Vasilis respectfully welcomes the imperial family. The crown prince honors the legacy of the empire's founder, expressing pride in visiting such a sacred historical site. He formally requests the traditional blessing for both himself and his sister, according to ancient imperial custom. Bowing respectfully, Vasilis gladly accepts. He then invites the crown prince to spend the night at his private residence. The prince briefly hesitates, wondering whether accepting such hospitality might appear politically biased. Throughout the discussion, Barkas stands silently nearby, his sharp eyes continuously surveying the surroundings. Ultimately, the prince accepts the invitation and instructs Barkas to watch over Ayla, noting that she is probably uncomfortable in unfamiliar surroundings. Nuzzle. Barkas's horse playfully tugs at his hood as the knight bows in acknowledgement. Watching the scene, the crown prince quietly remarks that he wishes Barkas would show his sister the same affection he shows his horses. Barkas says nothing. His unreadable gaze lingers on the distant carriages as the royal party settles into the monastery. A long silence follows while the prince reflects on the complicated relationship surrounding him. He wonders whether Talia has finally learned her place or whether she has merely become more cautious after her recent outbursts. Even so, he cannot help recalling the harsh intentions he once held toward the silent princess hidden inside her carriage. The monastery stands under a twilight sky, glowing with soft light from within its tall, arched windows. Prince Gareth looks up with an intense expression, his face slick with moisture in the dim interior light. Bathing in luxury? He observes that the monks live as lavishly as any of the high nobility. The grand hallway remains silent and imposing, reflecting the immense wealth and power of the church. Barkas bows to the crown prince and announces that a grand meal awaits them downstairs. The prince admits he cannot bring himself to grow attached to the cold, silver-haired knight. He questions whether he can truly trust a man who remains so perpetually guarded and suspicious. They discuss Ayla's absence, noting that she is recovering in the priestess dormitory after the exhausting journey. The prince scolds Barkas, suggesting he should show his fiancée, Ayla, much more attention and care. Barkas defends his actions, claiming he is merely ensuring Ayla is resting comfortably without being disturbed. The prince finds it fortunate that Barkas shows Ayla any kindness at all, given the knight's cold and ungrateful nature. Vasilis invites the noble guests to take their seats as the formal evening banquet finally begins. A magnificent feast is spread before them as they prepare to dine in the monastery hall. Standing behind the dark-haired crown prince, the silver-haired knight maintains a vigilant and silent posture. A soft murmur sounds as the gathered monks begin dining, their eyes fixed on the visitors. The monastery monks quietly observe that the commander of the Imperial Knights certainly possesses a remarkably extraordinary appearance. Watching Barkas, the crown prince reflects that the knight draws more attention than necessary everywhere he goes. A sharp creak sounds as the prince offers a toast, hoping the occasion becomes meaningful for everyone. Just then, Princess Talia appears, smiling gracefully and illuminated by a warm, ethereal light. Shadows deepen over the prince's face as he stares ahead in sudden shock. A startled gasp sounds as Princess Talia enters the hall wearing a stunningly ornate gold gown. A sharp crash echoes as the prince slams his goblet onto the table, red wine splashing everywhere. The crown prince rises in fury, demanding to know how Talia dares to show herself dressed like that when he explicitly warned her to stay out of his sight. Floral imagery surrounds Talia's thoughts as she asks how she could possibly stay away when her dear brother had apparently longed to see her so badly. A soft rustle sounds as Talia approaches the table, claiming she simply could not refuse his request and therefore made the effort to dress beautifully. Sitting at the table, Talia listens as the Crown Prince dismisses her arrival as nothing more than upsetting nonsense. Talia explains that since the Crown Prince asked so earnestly, it was only proper for her to meet his expectations while her brother stares at her with seething disgust. Talia asks if he is happy now, to which the prince coldly replies that he was perfectly happy until the moment she showed up. Glaring at her, the prince asks how much longer she intends to act up and whether she is trying to test how much of her he is willing to tolerate. Talia leans back calmly, remarking that his words are quite hurtful while claiming she merely accepted the invitation to join the banquet. She continues by saying she truly does not understand why he is so furious with her, his own adorable youngest sister, when she has done absolutely nothing wrong. A heavy swallow sounds as the nearby monks look on, sweating nervously during the intense royal confrontation. Celise, the blonde abbot, speaks up from his seat, asking the Crown Prince if he does not think he is being far too harsh toward his sister. A quick grab sounds as the Crown Prince suddenly seizes Talia's wrist with a rough, violent motion. Leaning over her, the prince cruelly remarks that she looks like she is in heat while holding her arm firmly in place. He snarls that if she needs someone to warm her bed, she should pick an attendant, warning that if she tarnishes the imperial name with scandal, he will ensure she can never show off that pretty face again. Talia calmly asks what exactly he is planning to do. Smiling up at him, she says his words make her desperate to live up to his expectations, causing the prince to clench his teeth in absolute fury. Filled with murderous intent, the prince reaches toward her chin. A soft rustle sounds as Barkas places a hand on the prince's shoulder, quietly addressing his highness. The prince stops and looks back while Talia watches the interaction with wide, curious eyes. Barkas gazes steadily at the prince, reminding him that everyone is waiting to hear his formal congratulatory speech. The prince blinks in shock, his face pale and damp with sweat as he suddenly realizes the gravity of his public outburst. Blurred, distorted imagery reflects the prince's inner turmoil as he stands amid the silent, watching guests. Narrowing his eyes, the Crown Prince reflects on the brief moment when he genuinely felt threatened by the knight's presence. A firm squeeze sounds as Barkas keeps his hand on the prince's shoulder, forcing him to remain composed. Taking a deep breath, the prince tells himself to endure it as he prepares to address the room. A quick turn sounds as Talia looks away, declaring she has wasted enough time on such pointless squabbling. A hesitant rustle follows as Talia tells everyone to begin eating, while the monks remain frozen in awkward silence. Raising his glass once more, the prince requests that everyone thank the abbot again for arranging such a wonderful gathering. A soft sigh escapes as Talia sits indifferently while the prince finishes his toast, wishing for a meaningful occasion for everyone. A sharp swallow sounds as the prince watches Talia, realizing this situation is far from over. Beneath the edge of the table, Barkas's armored hand quietly reaches out to grasp Talia's hand in a firm, secretive hold. Leaning slightly toward her, Barkas quietly tells the princess that, as a guest, she should at least show the bare minimum of manners. The knight fixes her with a cold, unrelenting gaze that demands silence and restraint. Talia stares back with wide eyes, stunned by the knight's sudden intervention. A sharp spark seems to pass through the air as the prince notices Talia's irritated expression, assuming she is about to throw something again. Instead, Talia remains silent, her expression unreadable as she contemplates the knight's words and the warmth of his grip. A soft gulp sounds as Talia raises her goblet, while the prince watches with renewed suspicion, wondering what she is scheming now. Eventually, he turns away, deciding there is no point paying attention to someone so insignificant. Talia takes a slow sip of her drink, her gaze fixed on the knight standing beside her brother. She continues drinking, her jewelry shimmering beneath the soft light as the meal finally proceeds. A soft tap sounds as Talia sets her goblet back onto the table with deliberate calm. Her hand remains trapped within Barkas's firm grip, causing warmth to spread across her skin. A wave of heat rushes through her as the intensity of the moment lingers. Talia silently regrets her choice of attire, realizing that wearing such a revealing gown had been a mistake. Looking down while Barkas stands silently behind the prince, her thoughts become consumed by an unfamiliar discomfort. The abbot asks whether the food is not to the princess's liking. The blonde abbot watches her with a curious, unwavering gaze throughout the meal. Talia meets his stare with an expression that remains both guarded and undeniably regal. Basilis humbly remarks that the monastery's food is simple compared to the lavish meals served in the imperial palace. Talia decides to eat something, hoping it will finally make the abbot stop speaking to her. Barkas maintains a stern, unyielding expression, his eyes fixed forward with chilling focus. Talia is suddenly overwhelmed by nausea, fearing she might vomit right there at the table. Nearby monks watch the unfolding royal drama with wide eyes and nervous uncertainty. Talia sits regally in her chair while the monks continue serving the royal guests. Waves of nausea continue to wash over her as she stares ahead, her blue eyes reflecting her growing distress. A sudden clatter sounds as Talia rises, declaring the banquet disappointing and announcing that she is going to sleep. Gareth watches her leave with irritation, convinced that his sister is causing yet another scene. Her gold gown brushes across the stone floor as she exits the hall. Talia walks alone through the cavernous, moonlit hallway, her silhouette casting a long, lonely shadow. Feeling physically ill, Talia stops to cover her mouth, struggling to maintain her outward composure. She questions her own motives for stirring up trouble while remembering the Empress's words about her brother's hatred. In a memory, young Gareth screams to be let go as knights restrain him during a struggle. Another memory shows the Empress in her mourning attire holding a sickly young Talia while quiet whispers spread around them. A small, tearful girl reaches desperately toward her mother with a faint cry. The Empress ignores the surrounding gossip, her face a mask of cold indifference while others pity the child. A soft smack sounds as the Empress kisses Talia's forehead, offering a rare and fleeting display of affection. A single tear reflects a world of pain beneath a cold sky. Talia reflects on how she began provoking Gareth after the former Empress's memorial service, simply to please her mother. Her own reputation plummeted while her brother suffered alongside her, yet she still desperately craved her mother's love. She realizes she was driven by the desire to ruin Gareth's honor. Talia finally understands that her mother loves no one, not the Emperor nor even the precious Azeroth she appears to treasure. To Cenobir, everyone is merely a tool to be used. A sudden voice calls out to the princess, echoing through the silent monastery hallway. A young monk steps out of the shadows, startling Talia as she searches for solitude. Framed beneath a towering arched window, the two stand isolated in the dim light. Talia demands to know why the monk followed her into such a secluded part of the building. Growing impatient when he hesitates, she sharply orders him to leave. The monk nervously explains that he came because of what she said earlier. Talia demands to know exactly what he means. Blushing, the monk refers to the incident that occurred during the banquet. Talia flinches slightly, her eyes widening as his boldness becomes increasingly uncomfortable. She firmly denies knowing what he is talking about, reminding herself that she cannot afford to show weakness. As she tries to leave, the monk brings up her remark about wanting to meet the crown prince's expectations. He recalls Gareth's cruel suggestion that she choose a bed partner from among her attendants. Flushed with inappropriate desire, the monk asks for permission to become that partner. He reaches toward Talia, leaving her frozen in genuine shock. Paralyzed by fear, she finds herself unable to move. Disgust surges through her as the monk dares to touch her face. Desperately, she tells herself to scream and make him go away. A silver-armored hand suddenly appears from the darkness. Thud! An armored figure strikes the monk with overwhelming force, sending him crashing to the floor. Barcus stands over the fallen monk, whose cries of pain echo through the hallway. The knight looks down with a terrifyingly cold gaze, his pale blue eyes burning with murderous intent. Talia stares at him in stunned silence, while his broad armored frame shields her completely. A sharp clatter echoes as Barcus steps toward the trembling monk who had harassed the princess. Talia remains frozen beneath the moonlight, her blue eyes filled with shock and lingering fear. Barcus grabs the monk by the collar and effortlessly hauls him into the air. Towering over the smaller man, his expression remains unreadable. The monk sweats profusely, his face drained of color as he stammers out a pathetic excuse. A violent choking sound cuts him off as Barcus tightens his grip, ordering him to remain silent. Barcus commands the monk to return to his quarters, warning that neither of them wants this matter to escalate any further. He coldly orders the monk to stay out of his sight forever, prompting the terrified man to promise immediate obedience. A hurried rhythm of footsteps echoes through the corridor as the monk flees, leaving Talia and Barcus alone in the monastery hallway. Talia flinches as Barcus finally turns toward her. His presence radiates cold, unyielding authority. She searches his face for even the slightest trace of concern but finds nothing. His expression remains as emotionless as stone despite having just saved her from a horrifying situation. A soft rustle fills the silence as Talia forces herself to remain standing, despite the turmoil inside her. Without another word, Barcus turns sharply, his cape snapping behind him as he orders the princess to follow. Talia silently follows him through the dim monastery corridors, her golden hair shimmering against the cold stone walls. As she walks behind him, her thoughts race. She cannot understand why the man who just rescued her behaves with such detached professionalism. The realization weighs heavily upon her. Only moments ago, she had nearly suffered something unimaginable. Barcus eventually stops before an open doorway leading into the monastery gardens. His silhouette is framed against the deep blue night sky. Talia finally asks why he is acting so indifferent after saving her. Looking down, her expression softens into one of quiet vulnerability. Outside, a silver moon hangs above the monastery towers, casting its pale glow over the peaceful gardens. From above, the two figures appear small as they walk along the narrow stone path. Talia suddenly snaps, ordering Barcus to stop following her because she has already reached her destination. A heavy step echoes across the stone. In a blur of motion, Barcus slams one armored hand against the wall beside her, trapping Talia where she stands. The princess gasps softly as the knight leans in, pinning her against the cold stone with overwhelming intensity. Moonlight gleams across his silver armor while his shadow completely engulfs her. Her voice trembles as she asks why his attitude has suddenly changed. Barcus gazes down at her through half-lidded eyes, his expression carrying restrained frustration. He tells her that she played with fire and got burned. His words linger in the silent garden as he asks if it is finally time for her to learn to be more cautious. After a brief pause, his voice grows even lower as he asks if she truly intends to keep treating her own life so recklessly. The question hangs heavily in the night air. Talia's jeweled wrist trembles as she instinctively reaches toward him. Varkas catches her hand firmly, telling her that, for the time being, she must learn to restrain herself. His unwavering gaze remains fixed on her as the two stand locked in tense silence. After a long moment, his armored fingers slowly slide away from her wrist. Without another word, Varkas turns his back on the princess and quietly walks away. Walking away, Varkas states that he trusts they now have a mutual understanding regarding her future conduct. As he departs, a dark vision flashes through Talia's mind. In it, she stands behind him with a blood-stained dagger hidden behind her back. Varkas turns his head slightly, his silver hair appearing crimson beneath the weight of the ominous premonition. The vision shifts as Talia, dressed in white, drives the dagger into his back. Blood splatters across her face as flower petals drift through the crimson haze. Varkas collapses onto a bed of white roses, his blood staining the petals a gruesome red. His lifeless eyes stare blankly ahead, while a thin trail of blood escapes his lips. The vision fades, returning Talia to reality. She watches Varkas disappear into the night, her eyes filled with murderous intent. Her jeweled hand clenches against her gown, the golden ring on her finger glinting faintly beneath the moonlight. Once he is gone, the overwhelming emotions she has been suppressing finally break free. Tears stream silently down her face as she trembles uncontrollably, covering her mouth in a desperate attempt to stifle her sobs. She wipes her eyes, trying to regain her composure, but the weight pressing on her heart refuses to lift. Alone, she wanders along the monastery's stone walls beneath the endless night sky, finding no comfort in the silence. Far ahead, Varkas's broad armored back disappears into the darkness while a crescent moon hangs above the trees, watching over the quiet monastery gardens. Morning arrives beneath a bright cloud-filled sky. The scene shifts to a formal religious ceremony where Varkas stands beside several high-ranking clergymen, prepared to participate in an important imperial rite. From a high window, Talia watches the gathering below with detached resignation. The solemn ceremony begins as the clergy approach the central altar. Choosing not to attend, Talia claims to be ill, unwilling to expose herself to the public. Despite her absence, Crown Prince Gareth orders the ceremony to proceed without delay. Talia bitterly assumes the monastery is relieved that an illegitimate princess will not be receiving its sacred blessing. Below, the ceremony continues around a grand fountain as the participants bow their heads in silent prayer. Varkas stands beside the high priestess, observing the ritual with unwavering composure while Talia remains nothing more than a distant spectator. She suddenly pulls the curtains shut, plunging her room into darkness before collapsing face first onto her bed. Seeking nothing but sleep, she finds herself haunted instead by memories of the monk's unwanted touch and the terrifying image of Varkas's cold, glowing blue eyes. Restless, she stares into the darkness as a suffocating silence fills the room. Her thoughts drift back several months before her 16th birthday. Standing before Varkas in an elegant purple gown, the younger Talia eagerly asks for his opinion, hoping to impress him. After a long silence, he bluntly remarks that she looks like a child playing dress-up in an adult's wardrobe. His criticism infuriates her. Clenching the fabric of her dress, she storms away before changing into another outfit. She wonders if her next choice is too revealing, constantly second-guessing herself because of his harsh words. Determined to appear mature while preserving the dignity expected of an imperial princess, she continues searching through her wardrobe. Eventually, she emerges wearing a deep maroon gown that gives her newfound confidence. She asks if it is suitable for her upcoming coming-of-age ceremony. Varkas merely sighs, clearly exhausted by her endless requests for validation. Even so, Talia fondly remembers that dress as the first one that truly felt like it belonged to her. For the first time, she notices the knight's expression soften ever so slightly. His eyes linger on her longer than usual, and the subtle change causes a warm blush to spread across her cheeks. Without warning, Varkas reaches forward and gently pulls her closer. Startled, Talia asks why he is suddenly acting so differently after spending the entire day pretending not to care. Smiling to herself, she teasingly concludes that he must have been paying much closer attention to her than he wanted to admit. Later, she changes into a vibrant green and gold gown. Standing beside Varkas, she beams with genuine happiness, her bright blue eyes sparkling with excitement. He watches her quietly, his unreadable gaze fixed entirely on her. As they stand together in the sunlit chamber, Talia senses that something between them has changed. She asks if she would resemble a fairy queen while dancing in the dress before ordering him to stop standing like a statue and practice with her. Varkas lets out another weary sigh, his patience clearly wearing thin. Ignoring his reluctance, Talia grabs his armored arm with bright, expectant eyes. Though his expression remains as detached as ever, she excitedly leads him toward the center of the room. Her radiant smile fills the chamber as she reaches for his hand. Surrounded by flowers, the two prepare to dance together. Talia pulls Varkas forward by the hand, insisting that he stop standing there like a statue and dance with her. Deep down, she convinces herself that it is only natural for him to have developed feelings for her after spending so many years at her side. She proudly notices that he is allowing her to drag him along, something he would never have tolerated in the past. To her, it feels as though he is finally letting her take the lead, pretending he has no choice but to indulge her. Looking up at him with a mixture of shyness and joy, Talia becomes convinced that something between them has truly begun to change. Talia hurried Varkas, telling him he should feel honored to dance with her. The two moved gracefully across the room, their steps perfectly in sync. Smiling brighter than ever, Talia found herself completely immersed in the moment as she danced in his arms. Without warning, the long train of her dress caught beneath her foot. Losing her balance, she stumbled forward, pulling Varkas down with her. They crashed onto the floor together, though he instinctively caught her to soften the fall. Varkas immediately asked if she was hurt. Dazed and aching beneath him, Talia's face burned with embarrassment. Instead of answering, she shouted at him, insisting the accident was entirely his fault. She claimed she had already ordered him to keep her room clean, so something like this would never happen. Varkas stared at her in disbelief before calmly reminding her that he was a royal guard, not a cleaning servant. Ignoring his response, Talia continued scolding him, declaring that if she ended up with even the smallest bruise, she would be doomed, making him a complete failure as her guard. As they attempted to stand, Talia suddenly cried out in pain. Several strands of her hair had become tangled around one of the buttons on Varkas's shirt. He paused and carefully examined the situation, while Talia repeatedly struck his chest in frustration, calling him an idiot for causing her pain. She angrily demanded that if he had done it intentionally, he should admit it to her face. Letting out a patient sigh, Varkas calmly began untangling her hair. Their faces were only inches apart. Talia suddenly became painfully aware of how close he was. Her heartbeat quickened as she caught the faint scent of mint on his breath. Trying to hide her embarrassment, she warned him that if he snapped even a single strand of her hair, he was as good as dead. Varkas ignored both her threats and her flustered expression, focusing entirely on freeing her hair. Meanwhile, Talia silently wondered if her face had already turned bright red. Growing increasingly embarrassed, she became irritated that the man who was usually so efficient was taking forever to untangle something so simple. Unable to bear the awkwardness any longer, she ordered him to cut the tangled hair instead. Without hesitation, Varkas drew his dagger. The moment she saw the blade, Talia panicked, desperately begging him not to cut off too much of her precious hair. With one swift motion, Varkas sliced through the metal button on his own shirt instead. The severed button dropped onto the floor with a soft clink, leaving Talia's hair completely unharmed. Standing up, Varkas calmly asked how much longer she intended to remain sitting on the floor. Burning with embarrassment, Talia picked up the fallen button and offered it back to him. He refused it. After receiving her permission to leave, Varkas quietly departed. That night, beneath the moonlight, Talia sat alone in her room, staring at the small metal button resting in her palm. She admitted to herself that she had been unable to sleep because of the strange, fluttering sensation in her heart. Lying awake in bed, she wondered if perhaps Varkas had begun developing feelings for her. Almost immediately, she rejected the thought as completely ridiculous. Only a few days later, every one of those hopeful fantasies was shattered by the announcement of Varkas and Ayla's engagement. The news struck Talia harder than she could have imagined. Varkas and Ayla. She refused to believe it. Desperate for answers, she hurried to confront Varkas. As she reached the door to his quarters, voices from inside stopped her. A woman was sobbing. Leaning against Varkas, she pleaded with him to tell her he did not truly love Ayla and that he was only marrying her for political reasons. With his usual cold expression, Varkas answered that he failed to see why his feelings should matter to her. He asked whether anything would actually change even if the marriage were purely political. He reminded her that he had pledged to take the first princess as his wife and intended to honor that promise. He continued by saying that he had made it clear from the beginning that he had no intention of returning her feelings. Now that his engagement was official, he hoped they would never have another uncomfortable encounter, as he wished to avoid any unnecessary scandal. Listening from outside the door, Talia immediately covered her mouth and fled, her eyes filled with disbelief and quiet pain. If she had arrived only moments earlier, she might have been the woman kneeling inside, crying after being rejected. She imagined herself begging Varkas to love her. She imagined him looking at her with that same emotionless expression. She imagined him treating her as nothing more than a nuisance. The mere thought made her feel as though she would have died on the spot. At that moment, she became terrified of him. He was a man capable of driving someone to despair with nothing more than a few words. Still lost in thought outside the building, Talia failed to notice Varkas approaching. Seeing her standing near the bushes, he instinctively reached out, warning that it was dangerous. Before he could touch her, Talia shouted at him not to touch her. She hurried away, leaving Varkas standing there in complete confusion. From that day onward, she resolved never to reveal her feelings. If she could not keep them buried, they would only bring her unbearable agony. She began acting more desperately than ever before. She deliberately chose every dress Varkas had once said did not suit her. She also started attending every banquet hosted at Empress Cenobiere's palace. At those gatherings, countless nobles praised her beauty, telling her she looked exactly like the young Empress Cenobiere. Part of her simply wanted to show off. She hoped Varkas would finally realize what he was missing. Everyone admired her. Surely she could become even more beautiful than Ayla. Yet no matter what she did, Varkas remained completely indifferent. Even after 7 years, he never showed the slightest concern. He never even tried to stop her. Whether she became drunk or spent her evenings gambling with noblemen over card games, Varkas simply stood nearby, expressionless as always. One evening, however, a man approached from behind and leaned over her chair. He remarked that she was drunk again. Talia smiled when she recognized him. Margus. He presented her with a small stuffed bunny, saying she should play with it instead of wasting time on card games because they were not good for her. She laughed and asked whether he thought she was still a child who played with toys. Ignoring her complaint, Margus invited her to finish the puzzle they had started together. She happily agreed. Unlike everyone else, Margus never touched her. Instead, he simply offered advice, puzzles, and little gifts. To Talia, it almost felt like having an uncle. Because she had spent her entire life starving for affection, she gradually lowered her guard around him. 4 days before her coming-of-age ceremony, Margus visited her again late at night carrying a wooden box. Inside, he claimed, was the puzzle he had promised her. He explained that he had wanted to give it to her during her coming-of-age ceremony, but he would be leaving the capital unexpectedly the following day. After apologizing for the late visit, he asked if he could come inside. Believing his explanation, Talia welcomed him in. It was the first time she had allowed anyone other than her guards and maids into her private quarters. Thinking the study would be the most appropriate place, she led him there. In her study, they sat across from each other at a table. Talia focused on the puzzle while Margus watched her with an unsettling look in his eyes. After some time, she finally completed it, only to realize his face was suddenly far too close to hers. Startled, she tried to lean away, but his legs trapped hers beneath the table, preventing her from moving. She turned her face aside, only for him to stand, his tall frame looming over her. Wearing a smug smile, he bent down behind her, placing one hand over hers in a disturbingly intimate gesture, while his other arm wrapped around her waist, sending panic coursing through her. She struggled desperately to break free, but his grip was far stronger than hers. He leaned close enough for his breath to brush against her ear, murmuring about the fragrance on her skin. He claimed it was the same perfume her mother used, saying Lady Cenobere had always worn that scent, and that once a man became accustomed to it, he could never stop craving it. Talia flinched in horror as his hand slid upward, gripping the upper part of her chest. She screamed and fought to escape, but they both crashed to the floor, where he pinned her beneath him. She clawed at him and tried to crawl away, yet he refused to let go. Terror completely consumed her as his assault continued. The very next moment, he was violently torn away from her. Talia looked up to see Varkas standing over the man. Margus's face was already bloodied from being slammed into the ground as Varkas held him down by the head, smashing his face against the floor again. Looking briefly at Talia, Varkas ordered her to return to her room immediately. Margus begged desperately for mercy, but Varkas ignored every plea and continued beating him. Seeing that Talia remained frozen in place, unable to move, Varkas shouted at her to leave at once. His voice finally broke through her shock, and she sprinted from the study in tears. Once inside her room, she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Reliving the horrifying assault over and over in her mind, she wished she could simply disappear. The thought that Varkas had witnessed her in such a helpless, degrading state filled her with unbearable shame. Moments later, the door opened, and Varkas quietly stepped into the room where she was still crying. Varkas quietly told the sobbing Talia that she would never have to see that man again. Through her tears, she asked whether he had killed him. After a brief pause, he answered that Margus would instead face permanent exile and would never again be allowed to set foot in the capital for the rest of his life. Before he could say anything further, Talia grabbed a pillow and hurled it at him. Her voice rose with uncontrollable anger as she demanded to know why he had let the man live. She screamed that he should have killed him, severed the filthy hands that had touched her, and cut out the tongue that had spoken those disgusting words. Weeping bitterly, she insisted that if Margus remained alive, he would someday return to trample and violate her again. She repeated over and over that the man had promised he would come back. Overcome by fear and rage, she began throwing anything she could reach at Varkas. Throughout it all, he stood perfectly still like a statue, silently enduring every insult as she shouted that he was useless and that she no longer needed someone like him. Then a heavy candlestick struck him in the head. Blood immediately ran down the side of his face, yet he did not even flinch. He remained standing in complete silence. Talia froze the instant she saw the blood. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what she had done. She could only stare at him, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face, unable to speak or move. After a long moment, Varkas slowly turned his back and walked away without saying a single word. Talia watched him leave before finally stumbling to her feet to search for him, but he was already gone. Only then did the weight of her actions truly sink in. The man who had saved her had become the target of her pain and anger. She was certain he could feel nothing but disappointment toward her now. She believed he had finally grown completely tired of her. After that day, Varkas never appeared before her again. They did not meet until several months later during the appointment ceremony for the new commander of the Imperial Guard. That day, he officially became Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Guard. As she watched his figure walk away, a sharp ache pierced her heart, yet she could not bring herself to say a single word. Everything inside her screamed for him not to leave, but her lips refused to move. And so, the boy her mother had given her 7 years earlier disappeared from her side. Back in the present, Varkas arrived at the monastery together with Princess Ayla. It was announced that they would remain there for one more day before returning to the capital. When Ayla asked about the crown prince, she learned that Gareth had once again gone to the abbot's private residence. She remarked that he had chosen to stay there again. She understood that the imperial family's pilgrimage was largely a political ritual meant to strengthen ties with influential citizens and powerful local figures. While she had no objection to Gareth building those relationships, the abbot from the capital continued to trouble her. If a demi-human had managed to overcome such prejudice and become the capital's abbot, then he either possessed exceptional political skill or enjoyed the backing of someone truly powerful. Though the man always behaved politely, she had noticed him watching Gareth throughout the journey. She suspected he might have been placed there by the Empress herself, since the Terran family, from which the Empress hailed, had maintained close ties with demi-humans since the era of the Ten Kingdoms. Ayla found it far too convenient that a quarter elf had risen to become the high priest of a monastery as influential as Mordaunt. Perhaps the Empress had already begun building her own faction within the Order to strengthen support for the second prince. For the moment, however, there was little Ayla could do except remain at the monastery for another day. The abbot, accompanied by a cloaked attendant, welcomed both her and Varkas warmly. He expressed what an honor it was to host her again and assured her that anything she required would be provided. Ayla thanked him for his hospitality before making an unexpected request. She asked that, before they departed the following day, a separate benediction ritual be held for Talia so that the second princess could receive a proper blessing. The abbot visibly stiffened at her request. Ayla immediately noticed the brief flash of vigilance that crossed his eyes. He cautiously asked whether she truly wished to perform a benediction rite specifically for the second princess. Ayla calmly confirmed that she did. Since they would already be staying another day, she believed it was the perfect opportunity for Talia to receive the blessing. From behind her, the cloaked man finally spoke. It was Varkas. In his usual calm tone, he remarked that he had not realized the first princess cared so deeply for the second princess. His question was met with silence. Ayla looked at Varkas while he remained expressionless, though there was a subtle meaning hidden within his eyes. She felt that after enduring Talia for 7 long years, it was only natural for him to remain constantly on edge whenever the second princess was involved. Even so, there were times when his unusual sensitivity toward Talia's affairs irritated her more than she cared to admit. Ayla finally replied that she was not worried about her sister, but about him. The king had entrusted Talia to his care, and if His Majesty discovered that the ceremony had been conducted without the second princess, Varkas might face unnecessary reprimand. Varkas answered calmly that even so, he could not simply drag someone to the altar against her will. Ayla fell silent for a moment before suggesting they should at least confirm Talia's intentions first. The second princess was incredibly fickle, and there was always the possibility she might change her mind by morning. Varkas, however, dismissed the suggestion. He declared that the procession would depart the moment the sun rose, and that he had no intention of delaying the schedule simply to accommodate the whims of the second princess. Though his dismissive attitude stung her, Ayla chose not to argue and quietly agreed. Varkas then offered to escort her back to her quarters. As they walked, she asked whether something had happened the previous night. Without even turning around, he replied flatly that it was nothing that concerned her. She quietly observed that such an answer only confirmed something had indeed happened, but Varkas simply continued walking without another word. Watching his back grow more distant, Ayla stopped in her tracks, her face filled with longing and quiet sorrow. More than anything, she wished her reflection could remain within his eyes. Lost in thought, she almost failed to notice him extending a hand toward her. He calmly reminded her to watch her step since the ground was filled with deep puddles from the rain. When she hesitated, he simply lifted her into his arms and carried her. Her face immediately turned crimson. Softly, she told him that he could be incredibly cruel sometimes. As always, he gave no reply. She knew his kindness existed only because of the vow he had made to her mother. It was nothing more and nothing less. That was precisely why it hurt so much. If he had simply been cold toward her, perhaps she could have accepted their engagement as nothing more than a political arrangement. Upon reaching her quarters, Varkas gently set her down and informed her that he would have the servants prepare a hot bath. He advised her to warm herself and get some rest. Just as she was about to respond, she noticed his gaze had shifted elsewhere. Following his line of sight, she froze. Under the pouring rain and flashes of thunder, Talia sat upon the windowsill of her second-story room. Each flash of lightning illuminated her white figure, making her appear almost ethereal against the darkness. For a single fleeting moment, only one word entered Ayla's mind: an angel. Her thoughts were violently interrupted when Talia suddenly hurled a flower vase toward them. Varkas instantly stepped in front of Ayla, shielding her from the impact. The vase shattered, leaving only a shallow cut across his cheek. At that instant, Ayla's heart pounded violently. The half-sister she had always regarded as insignificant suddenly felt like the most ominous and terrifying existence in the entire world. It was as though the very same spirit that had condemned her own mother to a lifetime of suffering now stood before her, ready to drag her into the same abyss of despair. Sometime later, Talia, dressed in a flowing white gown, walked alone through a dimly lit corridor beneath the monastery. The silent hallway was illuminated only by pale moonlight filtering through towering Gothic windows. Hidden behind her back, she tightly gripped a small dagger, her fingers wrapped firmly around its hilt. Every step she took was deliberate, her expression solemn and unwavering. She eventually stopped before the door to Ayla's room. Catching the faint scent of burning incense drifting from within, a cold smile slowly formed across her lips. Judging by the lingering fragrance, last night had clearly not been peaceful for the first princess. A single tear slid down Talia's cheek. The one memory she had treasured above all others was the day Varkas had rescued her from despair and carried her back to safety. It was a precious memory she had buried deep within her heart, one she only dared revisit when no one else was watching. But the sight of Varkas carrying Ayla the previous day had shattered that treasured memory into pieces. Standing before Ayla's door, Talia tightened her grip on the dagger, her resolve hardening. She had decided to kill her. Her eyes burned with fierce determination. Even if history remembered her as the wicked witch who stole the life of an innocent princess, she no longer cared. Even if she fell to the very bottom of despair afterward, she believed she had nothing left to lose. With those thoughts filling her mind, she slowly reached for the door handle. Talia reached for the door handle, only to discover it was locked. She clicked her tongue in frustration before turning away. In the end, she decided it was for the best. If she acted recklessly now and failed, she would only be throwing her own life away. She needed to prepare more carefully. There was still a long journey ahead, and she could afford to wait for a better opportunity. Just then, she noticed a familiar figure descending the staircase with a hood pulled over her head. She immediately recognized the woman as one of the attendants her mother had assigned to her. Keeping herself hidden, Talia watched as the woman met another cloaked figure. The man discreetly handed her a small vial. Talia recognized him at once. It was the monk from the banquet. After concealing the vial beneath her clothes, the attendant began walking back. Realizing she might be discovered, Talia quickly ran back to her own room before the woman could spot her. Once inside, she sat on the floor, deep in thought. Was that monk secretly working with the attendant? Were they planning to poison someone? If it were ordinary poison, her mother's attendant could have obtained it without outside assistance. If they had gone to such lengths to acquire it in secret, then it had to be something completely forbidden within the capital. Pressing herself against the door, Talia listened carefully to the footsteps outside, wondering what exactly they were planning. One thing was certain, something significant was about to happen. She quietly concluded that now her mother had finally made her move, Gareth was as good as dead. With any luck, Ayla would meet the same fate. Cenobie always obtained whatever she desired. The following morning, the long and exhausting pilgrimage resumed once more. Riding alongside the procession, Edric studied his map and estimated that, at their current pace, they would cross into the former kingdom of Osiria within 10 days. His eyes drifted toward Talia's tightly sealed carriage. With every curtain drawn shut under the scorching summer heat, he wondered how she had not roasted alive inside. He called out to her, suggesting she at least open the curtains and let some fresh air in. The only response he received was an irritated order from Talia telling him to go away. Despite the hostility, Edric sighed in relief. At least she was still alive. He then turned toward Varkas and complained, asking when they planned to stop because he himself was beginning to roast under the relentless heat. As usual, Varkas gave no reply. Edric frowned inwardly. For the next several days, their route would pass through barren wastelands filled with rocky plains and harsh mountain terrain. He honestly doubted someone as delicate as Talia could endure such an unforgiving journey. Before long, another soldier rode forward and respectfully suggested to Varkas that they stop and rest. Though it was still somewhat early, the soldiers were already becoming exhausted from the heat, and the rear ranks had begun falling behind. Varkas simply looked at the man. That single glance alone was enough to make the soldiers shiver before hastily apologizing for speaking out of turn. After a brief silence, Varkas finally answered that there was a lake further ahead where they would make camp. Edric immediately complained that Varkas had ignored him completely, only to listen when another soldier made the exact same suggestion. Even so, his thoughts soon wandered elsewhere. If Varkas truly left for the east after marrying Ayla, what would become of Talia? Once Ayla departed with her husband, only Crown Prince Gareth and Princess Talia would remain inside the imperial palace. Before long, the procession reached the lake and began setting up camp. Edric approached Talia's carriage and knocked on the door, informing her that it was time to rest and asking her to come outside. There was no reply. He sighed and asked how long she intended to remain so stubborn. She had been shut inside the carriage the entire journey, and if she refused to come out, she would eventually collapse. He waited patiently, but there was still no answer, and not the slightest movement from within. Anxiety suddenly gripped him. What if she had already fainted? Without wasting another moment, he opened the carriage door. A wave of trapped heat burst outward from the enclosed interior. Along with it came a surprisingly sweet fragrance that reminded him of honey mixed with milk. His heart skipped a beat when he saw Talia lying unconscious on the floor. He immediately climbed inside, gently lifting her into his arms while repeatedly calling her name. To his surprise, she felt astonishingly light. After several anxious moments, she slowly regained consciousness. The instant her deep blue eyes opened, they captivated him completely. His brief moment of relief ended just as quickly when Talia slapped him across the face and abruptly sat upright, demanding to know how he dared lay his filthy hands on her. Edric rubbed his cheek, almost amused that the slap had barely hurt. He explained that he had genuinely thought she had lost consciousness. Talia immediately accused him of trying to take advantage of her while she was defenseless. Completely dumbfounded, Edric asked how she could possibly say something like that. Attempting to stand, he struck his head against the low ceiling of the carriage and dropped back down, clutching his head in pain. Talia coldly ordered him to stop bothering her and get out. Ignoring the insult, Edric urged her to come outside for some fresh air. They still had half a day's journey remaining, and he could not understand how long she intended to stay trapped inside the sweltering carriage. Talia frowned, wondering why he insisted on nagging her so much. Edric, meanwhile, could practically guess what she was thinking. It was not that he wanted to meddle in her affairs. The princess was his responsibility during this pilgrimage. If she collapsed from heat exhaustion, he would be the one held accountable. If necessary, he was prepared to drag her outside by force. Stretching out his hand toward her, he asked one final time whether she intended to come out or not. Talia remained seated exactly where she was, making no move to accept his hand. Squatting beside a small stream, Edric found himself thinking about how unbelievably stubborn Talia was. He wondered if she was constantly on guard, terrified that someone might try to harm her. Glancing toward her carriage from the corner of his eye, he questioned why he was even trying to understand her in the first place. He had heard that she went through personal guards as easily as changing clothes, so it was only a matter of time before he, too, would be replaced. All he had to do was endure this pilgrimage until it ended. Then he would finally be free. Fortunately, by noon, the oppressive heat had begun to ease. After several more days of relentless travel, the procession crossed the Giza Mountains, which separated the western territories from the northeast, and finally entered the Sinai Plains, once the territory of the former Balto Kingdom. Upon arrival, Varkas immediately ordered barricades to be erected before camp was established for the night. The other soldiers groaned in exhaustion, unable to understand how Varkas remained completely unfazed after spending the entire day on horseback just like the rest of them. Once the barricades had been completed, Edric couldn't help feeling they were excessive. Then he remembered hearing that the region was known for monster activity. Although creatures rarely attacked large military formations, there was no harm in being cautious. When the camp had finally settled, Edric headed toward the cooks and asked whether the second princess's dinner had already been delivered. A servant informed him that the princess had refused it, claiming she had no appetite. Edric stared in disbelief. She had skipped lunch, and now she intended to skip dinner as well. Was she a child throwing a tantrum over food? Tossing a basket toward the servant, he instructed him to pack it with the nicest meal available. He knew there was little point in forcing food on someone determined not to eat, but he could not forget how frighteningly light she had felt when he carried her earlier that day. Carrying the basket himself, he knocked on the carriage door and announced that he had brought her dinner. From inside came Talia's cold reply that she had already said she was not going to eat. Edric reminded her that she had practically starved herself the entire day and asked how she expected to survive such a grueling journey without eating properly. Even if she lacked an appetite, she should at least try to eat something. She shouted that she did not want it. Sighing, he told her he would simply leave the food outside in case she changed her mind later. To his surprise, the carriage door suddenly opened. Standing before him was Talia, her icy blue eyes completely devoid of warmth. She asked whether her words meant absolutely nothing to him. How many times had she told him to leave her alone? Was she some kind of joke to him? Caught completely off guard, Edric quietly explained that he had only brought her food because he was worried she might collapse. She stared at him before asking why he would ever worry about her. Stammering slightly, he replied that he was her personal guard, and it was his duty to look after her, only for Talia to cut him off with a cold, mocking laugh. She asked whether he truly believed she was a complete fool. Did he think she didn't know the Riam Knights were nothing more than the Crown Prince's loyal lapdogs? She accused him of poisoning the food. At those words, Edric's patience finally snapped. Raising his voice, he declared that he was an Imperial Knight, and that her accusation was not merely an insult to him, but to the entire Imperial Guard. Talia scoffed, saying she had no reason to believe a single word he said. If he wanted to grovel before someone, he should do it before her half-siblings, because she had no need for such false concern. She slammed the carriage door shut in his face. Furious, Edric threw the basket of food onto the ground before storming away. Whether she starved or not was no longer his concern. He needed to eat as well. Later that night, Talia quietly slipped out of her carriage and concealed herself in the darkness, patiently waiting. She wondered when the attendant assigned by her mother would finally make her move. What had Cenobir sent the woman to accomplish this time? As she waited, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Having barely eaten for days, her body was beginning to weaken. For a fleeting moment, she wondered whether it would have been wiser to accept the knight's food after all. Judging from Edric's behavior, he hardly seemed clever enough to devise some elaborate scheme against her. The thought disappeared almost immediately as the memory of Margus resurfaced. That horrifying experience remained deeply engraved within her heart. She reminded herself that the people who appeared the most harmless were often the ones least worthy of trust. Time passed quietly until she finally spotted the cloaked attendant moving through the camp. Talia narrowed her eyes. The woman was heading in the wrong direction. Ayla's carriage lay elsewhere. Inwardly, she thought how convenient it would be if the attendant simply went there and finished whatever task Cenobir had assigned her. Following the woman's movements, Talia suddenly realized she was approaching Varkas's tent. The next moment, the attendant vanished from sight. Frowning, Talia wondered where she had gone. Had she entered Varkas's tent? Her thoughts raced. The Sirkin family held tremendous influence throughout both the north and the east. If Ayla and Varkas married, Gareth would gain the support of one of the Empire's most powerful noble houses. Was that why her mother intended to eliminate Varkas? The possibility struck her like lightning. Acting entirely on instinct, she rushed straight toward the tent. Throwing open the entrance, she found it completely empty. Of course, she realized. Varkas would never still be here. He always began his routine before dawn, likely patrolling the camp or speaking with Torque. She quickly searched the interior, looking for any sign of blood. Just then, someone entered the tent behind her. She turned in panic and found herself face to face with Gareth. The Crown Prince demanded to know what she was doing inside Varkas's tent. Ignoring the question, Talia immediately tried to leave, but Gareth forcefully grabbed her wrist to stop her. Pain shot through her arm, causing her to cry out as she demanded he let go. Instead, Gareth shouted again, demanding an explanation for why she had been sneaking around inside Varkas's quarters. Without hesitation, Talia stomped hard on his foot before wrenching herself free and sprinting away. She did not stop running until she reached her carriage. Throwing herself inside, she shut the door and collapsed onto the floor. Frustrated with herself, she cursed her own stupidity. Why had she rushed into the tent without thinking? Meanwhile, Gareth was forced to summon a healer to tend to the injury she had inflicted on his foot. Alone inside her carriage, Talia wondered whether Gareth had noticed something suspicious. Why else would he have appeared at Varkas's tent at precisely that moment? They all head out by dawn. Talia is relieved that there are no signs of trouble since Gareth stopped chasing her due to the fact that all eyes are on the royal procession. In the end, nothing happens, and another tedious day passes. If they travel much farther without rest, they might all collapse from exhaustion, especially Edric. Fortunately, they set up camp just before reaching the second sacred site shortly before sunset. Had they traveled a little farther, they would have entered the open plains. The stop comes as a relief to Talia, who has reached her limit after enduring the constant jolting of the carriage on an empty stomach. Edric's voice calls from outside the carriage, announcing that he has brought her some fruit. Talia is tired of his persistence. Even after rejecting him countless times, he refuses to give up. To her, it is suspicious. Unless he has some hidden motive, she sees no reason for him to flatter her so relentlessly. Edric explains that since she refused to eat cooked food out of fear it had been poisoned, he figured unprocessed fruit would be acceptable. He says he is genuinely worried the pilgrimage will turn into a funeral procession if she continues starving herself and urges her to stop being stubborn and eat. Talia remains unconvinced. In her mind, poison could just as easily have been smeared onto the fruit's skin. Without another word, Edric bites into one of the fruits himself to prove it is safe. Instead of reassuring her, the gesture disgusts Talia. She assumes he expects her to eat his leftovers. Coldly, she tells him to stop bothering her and get lost. As she walks away, Edric mutters to himself, wondering if get lost is the only phrase she knows. Talia leaves the carriage and sits beneath a nearby tree, resting her back against its trunk. Before long, she hears Ayla's cheerful laughter. Looking up, she spots Ayla in the distance. The sight alone immediately sours her mood. She has no energy to endure Ayla's blissful smile. Then she notices Varkas standing beside her. The two are standing far too close. Varkas suddenly leans forward and kisses Ayla. Talia freezes in utter disbelief. Horror and deep unease wash over her. She never wanted to witness something like that. The shock is so overwhelming that she loses her balance and begins to fall. Strong hands catch her before she hits the ground. Gareth. Still gripping her arm, the Crown Prince stares at her before bursting into harsh, mocking laughter. Talia struggles to pull away, but his grip is far too strong. Gareth admits that he had his suspicions, but now everything has become perfectly clear. To think that the royal family's greatest disgrace harbors feelings for the Lord of the East, the very idea is laughable. He mocks her mercilessly, saying that an illegitimate child who does not even know her place dares to covet the heir of Grand Duke Saken, like mother, like daughter. The habits of a cheap whore who covets another woman's man never disappear. He tells Talia to wake up from her pathetic delusion. Varkas is far beyond the reach of someone like her. Talia looks him directly in the eyes. Then she calmly reminds him that he is forgetting something. The blood flowing through her veins does not belong only to a cheap whore. It also belongs to the man who slept with a young girl while his own wife was heavily pregnant. The very same shameless blood runs through Gareth's veins as well. Talia refuses to let the exchange end with Gareth holding all the advantage. A faint smile touches her lips. Then she asks if she should reveal one of his own secrets instead. After all, there is a quiet rumor spreading among the ladies-in-waiting. They say the exalted crown prince seeks out only women with dark wheat-colored hair and deep blue eyes every single night. A heavy tension hangs between them as Talia continues speaking. Somehow, she thinks she knows who the woman in Gareth's dreams is. She can even guess who first made him a man and stained his bedsheets. Gareth stares at her with darkening eyes, his grip tightening painfully around her arm. Talia calmly assures him there is no need to tremble like that, since she is, after all, his good little sister. Deep down, she knows she has already gone too far. If she pushes him any further, she might truly die. She tells him she will keep his secret until the bitter end. The secret that His Imperial Highness, the Crown Prince, seems to have inherited a very, very concentrated dose of His Majesty the Emperor's blood. In a burst of rage, Gareth slams her hard onto the ground before wrapping both hands around her neck and trying to strangle her. Talia gasps desperately for air as his grip tightens. Varkas rushes in and forcefully pulls Gareth away from her, allowing Talia to breathe again as she coughs violently. Despite Gareth's furious expression, Talia answers him with a faint smirk. Varkas can only stare at her with those cold, piercing eyes. Moments later, Edric comes running toward them, calling out to the princess as she lies on the ground. Still restraining Gareth, Varkas orders Edric to escort the second princess back to her carriage. Just then, Isla arrives and witnesses the scene unfolding before her. Instead of questioning Talia, she scolds Gareth for causing such a disgraceful disturbance despite being the crown prince. Gareth angrily snaps at her to stay out of it. His harsh words make Ayla flinch. She never expected her brother to speak to her that way. Before she can respond, Talia speaks from behind, her voice dripping with mockery. She tells Isla to stay out of their business. After all, it was nothing more than a little quarrel between siblings. Leaning toward Gareth, Talia asks with a mocking smile if she is right. They are close enough to share each other's secrets, aren't they? The smile on Talia's face only fuels Gareth's anger even further. Ayla watches in confusion, unable to understand why Gareth is reacting so violently or what had been said between them. Finally, Gareth coldly orders Varkas to remove his hands from him. As he storms away, he spares Varkas a meaningful glance before shooting Talia one last malicious look. Talia watches him leave with a satisfied smile, as though he were a defeated soldier. Her brief triumph ends the moment Varkas suddenly grabs her wrist. He instructs Edric to escort Ayla back before dragging Talia away with him. Talia struggles and screams at him to let her go. Without the slightest effort, Varkas lifts her over his shoulder and carries her straight to her carriage. Once inside, he sets her down and asks whether he had not already warned her to stop creating unnecessary trouble. Talia glares back and demands to know why she should listen to him. Who the hell does he think he is? Varkas steps closer until only inches separate their faces. His furious blue eyes lock onto hers as he replies that, at the very least, he is worth more than a princess who is only royalty in name. Talia swings at him in anger. He catches her wrist with ease. Holding her firmly in place, Varkas asks if she is acting so recklessly because she truly does not understand that no one here is going to actively protect her. If the crown prince truly decides he wants her dead, no one can guarantee her life. Talia asks why he even cares. If she disappeared from this world, wouldn't he be the one who felt the most relieved? Varkas leans even closer. His voice is low and unwavering as he admits that he cannot bring himself to deny that. Enjoying this so far? Comment Talia below. Until next time.